Yeah, I just found out in Spain. I've only been doing the blind branch for about a couple months.
Wow.
They're more interested in one
Specific tools? Special tools? Wow.
Yes. Grandma, but he also was reorganized.
All right. I'd like to call the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the July 15th GPC. I'd like to recognize that we're on the traditional territory of Sinixt First Nations. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Question period sign-up sheet is on the desk by the computers. I don't know where that is. Thank you. Any member of the gallery with a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. At this end of question period, the chair will call those who have signed up to the podium to address council. Ms. Curry, introduction of late items.
Thank you, Chair. There are no late items today.
Thank you. Can I have a motion for the adoption of the agenda? Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Bonner. Those in favor? Great. The minutes as circulated, everyone have a chance to review. Moved by the Mayor, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Great. Before we get into reports, I just want to thank the staff that took us on today's downtown tour. That was a really wonderful opportunity for all of us to kind of put some visuals to the conversations that we're having. So I know I'm not the only one who enjoyed it. Thank you very, very much. We have no governance and management excellence, no environmental responsibility, no economic health. So on to community wellness and livability, to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, the Chair, and I guess I was going to start off at the same point and just say thank you for Council for your time this morning. I know you're all very busy, but we had a suggestion from a staff member that maybe this would be a good way to start the day off. I was taking a little tour of downtown and it would help us all start with this conversation that we're hoping to have this afternoon about our downtown. And of course, I guess to start with, why are we here? Why are we talking about the downtown? I don't need to remind Council that your strategic plan actually under your economic development pillar talks about the need to have downtown recognized as a livable and desirable heart of our community. And I think it's interesting that it sits under your environmental, under the economic leg of your strategic plan. But really, if you look at the others of livability, of environment, I think there's many things in it that a prosperous, attractive, efficient downtown contributes to many parts of your strategic plan. So that is partly why we have that here, is that because it takes such a prominent place in your strategic plan, we felt it was a need to come to GPC and have this discussion. We really want to give you today an overview on the downtown. And we're going to take a little bit, we're experimenting a little bit, we're doing a little bit different than what we've done other GPCs. And I'll start by stating that this is a PowerPoint-free GPC, so there's no PowerPoint for you today. This is the only thing you're going to see on the slide, and just an image of downtown, so it helps if there's a conversation or if there's things we want to point out to. We might zoom in and out of our Google map here and talk about areas in the downtown. Other than that, the information that you have that was distributed in your agenda and it's represented on these boards here is kind of an overview of many of the current things that are happening in the downtown, many of those things that we talked about today. We are not going to go into each one of them. However, if there's something on there that's of interest to Council that you want us to talk about, we can certainly do that. We can get into the details. There are a few things that we do need to talk to you about, and I'll go over those in a minute. There's 4 things. They happen to be things that staff are working on right now, and they're things that you're going to see in the near future that we need decision points on with Council. So we'll just spend a few minutes of going over those, but really the intent of today is to get the discussion going amongst Council of what your priorities are. Again, the idea would be not to come with decisions out of today, but certainly so you have it back in mind as you move forward and start with the idea with the 2020 budget and move forward with future budgets. Before we get too far into it, just a couple. I just want to ask Alyssa to identify herself. Alyssa's sitting in the back. Alyssa's one of our team members, and I just want to recognize Alyssa because she's the one who put all these boards together. And I sat down with her early on. Madeline, maybe I could just turn over to you for a second. Can you just explain to council kind of the whole idea of graphic recording and how we use it these days?
Sure. So yeah, we'll be using the tool graphic recording today. So basically I'm going to be listening in on the discussion and trying to capture as much of it as I can using images and text. So this is a great tool for like visioning sessions or sessions like this where you're kind of tackling a bit of a larger number of topics. So hopefully it will bring some clarity to the visual cues. It stimulates creativity is the idea. So yeah, it's something useful for sessions like this. I won't be able to capture everything, like it certainly doesn't replace minutes, but what I'd like to do at the end, if you have something that you'd love to see up there, I'll leave my pens out. Feel free to jump in and do your own drawing or capture something else.
Thanks, Madeline. And this is something that I expect as we move forward with our public participation. This is a mechanism or a tool that you will see us use in more of our open house and sessions with the community. We're really hoping to generate discussion today with council. We're going to try to keep what we have to say to a minimum. Like I said, there's 4 presenters. We're going to talk to you quickly, each on a little piece that they want to talk about. We're going to try to leave the rest of the time for council. But to help, maybe just to start that discussion, I've put a piece of paper in front of each of you. Just your top 3 priorities on downtown. I was just hoping that council could take a quick minute, write out your 3 priorities right now before the discussion happens. I'm just going to give those over to Alyssa, and she's going to try to identify if there's common themes, common areas, and then after our presentations, we're going to circle back and put those up and see if we start to see some common areas of interest come out of council. So if you can just take 5 minutes, and if you can't come up with 3, if you just have 1, that's fine too. Go for it. I'll collect them here. Thank you very much. So we'll work on see if we can go through those and pull out any common themes, and we'll circle back on that in a few minutes. One of the things before I turn it over to our speakers, I just want to touch on is this definition of, I often get asked, well, what is downtown? What is the area that we're talking about? And I think there's no, I can't say that it's one specific place because it's depending what issue you're looking at, what the topic is. We've measured it differently in the past. And we have one board and it's attached to your agenda package, which just talks about defining the downtown core. For many people, when we talk about the downtown, it's kind of this natural area between the Millstone River with Pine Street extending around, including the Portlands. So we think of downtown this way when we had previously talked about our DCC exemption area, but we think about it this way when we talk about a downtown exemption for tax exemption. We kind of follow this pattern. There's been other plans over the years. There's an old city neighborhood plan that was done. Well, Richard, you did that about 35 years ago.
It was called a new city then.
That was the new city plan. So we have the old city neighborhood plan, which is shown on the bottom left of your package there, and then the actual downtown planning area, which is more of that traditional commercial business district that you think. When we did further work on the downtown plan, we identified sort of these precinct areas in the downtown that each have a sort of unique role in the fabric of our downtown. And our official community plan again kind of identifies that commercial central business district as our commercial core, surrounded by this medium density neighborhood, which is the goal here. So I'd like to say there's one current definition of downtown. There's not, and I think today, however, I think a lot of what we'll probably end up talking about is sort of that commercial area that's along Commercial Street and extends up Fitz Way. No other questions about and where we're talking about? And through the chair, I'd also note that in addition to the boards that were put together, if you're wondering what this table is here to my right, this is actually a selection of planning documents that have been done over the last, probably 20 plus years on the downtown, all having policy for downtown. I would say that one of the things that I'll be honest about is many of these have visions for downtown, ideas for downtown, but not all of them move forward with implementation. And I think really we're at the point right now to talk about how do we implement the best ideas in these plans and let us move forward. I can't speak for all staff, but from my perspective, the planning work's done. It's how do we take the objectives and the targets out of these documents and decide what do we want to implement in the downtown. So as I mentioned earlier, there's four people who are going to speak to you on various topics. Mr. Corson's going to talk to you a little bit about One Port Drive. Then Mr. Harding's going to talk about Maffeo Sutton and the park plan, followed by Mr. LaBerge talking about our social challenges in the downtown. And then Mr. Rose is going to follow with an update about the downtown mobility study. Unless there's any questions for me, I'll turn it over to Mr. Corson to start the presentations.
Great, thanks, Mr. Lindsay. So we have control of the map. Just where we can blow in.
The mouse.
Oh, right here. Thank you.
Mouse has control.
Mouse. So it was good today. I thought to go down and actually see this site, and there's for me who's worked on this project since 2013, you go down today and it's quite exciting to see the Front Street connection going through, the interim walkway being constructed. So certainly progress is being made down there. So I thought I'd just quickly take you through work that we've done on the site, just to remind you, since 2013, and then talk to you about some of the next steps that we'll be bringing forward to you in the coming weeks. So this is, again, this is half the property that we purchased from CP Rail in 2013. We bought everything north of the trestle, including the roadway down to the Port Authority. And at that time, we had kind of 4 or 5 main goals. And one was to stimulate waterfront redevelopment. That was one of the main reasons we bought the property. Another key acquisition rationale was access. And again, so today to see that access issue being resolved is wonderful. So that was one of the main challenges. We knew the wooden trestle was at the end of its life, and we had to find a way of providing access to all these lands to the south to unlock them. And through the engineering department, the planning department, we spent a lot of time looking at options, and then we were able to go through the detailed design work to to actually get that built. So it should be officially open in a few weeks. At the time we purchased the property, the transit exchange was actually one of the reasons we bought it too. And the idea then was to look at a portion of the property that was unencumbered where it would fit. And now we're seeing the transit exchange down there. We had that discussion today about the fact that through the planning work we've done, it'll likely be situated on Front Street itself and not on the site. But again, a lot of the vision is starting to come together. And really the key thing we always say to people is when we bought this property, we thought it was going to be a long-term hold. We would maybe get the transit exchange down there, we'd maybe work on the access issue, but the rest of it would probably sit in kind of semi-industrial use for the next 20 years. And that all changed when we found out that C-SPAN wanted to leave, and we knew that we had to then come to an arrangement with them to unlock these lands for development. So I'm just going to take you through some of the work we've done on the site. We've done a substantial amount of environmental work on the property, which was a key first step to understand what we could do with the property. Dave Whitty and his team led the South Downtown Waterfront Initiative, which looked at a larger vision for One Port Drive, the Assembly Wharf lands, the remainder of the CP lands, and the SFN banana property. And that really set kind of 5 key guiding principles for the redevelopment of this area. We've taken those guiding principles and those have been captured in all the work we've been doing since then. On this site, you can actually, this is a newer map. We've done quite a lot of demolition on the property. We used to have the Island Pallet property, which was a disaster. Lease was terminated, the building was demolished. We removed some of the dock infrastructure, which was redundant, that's been removed. C-SPAN removed their building, so the site really has been cleared for development from a structures perspective. We've undertaken archaeological work on the site, so we've understand where the existing, where the former shoreline was, and where there is an archaeological site on the property. The Port Drive master plan was a key initiative which sets the frame for how these lands could be developed, and we'll be coming back to you with more discussion on that in the coming weeks. And then really the key thing for us was finalizing the agreement with C-SPAN, which we closed that in April. So now the city owns all the land north of the railway tracks, and again, that's why we'll be coming back to you seeking some decisions as to what you want to do with the property. The report we'll bring to you in the coming weeks will talk about interim options for the site. So what can we do on this site in the next year or two? Are there some temporary uses we could bring in? Such as maybe something not as exciting as parking, but perhaps some public recreation, basketball courts, markets, those things we can bring down to liven up the site. And then kind of the longer term, what does council want to do in terms of redevelopment? Are you interested in redeveloping the site? Do you want to follow the Port Drive master plan? Are there things you want to advance like park space down there ahead of development? How do you want to phase the redevelopment of these lands? Those are all things we'll be coming and asking for your direction. So.
Mr. Corson, we have a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Mr. Corson. On our little tour there, we talked about the environmental and mitigation of what's underneath the ground.
Yes.
How deep can we go, and like in terms of can we rip up the pavement and put down grass? Can we put in a basketball court without having to dig into the stuff that's going to cost money?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So if you leave the current asphalt in place, you can use this site as is. If you start removing the asphalt, then you need to start raising the site. So the recommendations we have from the environmental studies are if you remove the concrete, the asphalt, you need to probably put about 1 meter of topsoil on top to act as a buffer. So if you want to start doing more formal park work, there's a little more analysis required to work. So I would really view interim uses as using the site kind of as is without too many excavation work required.
So like a go-kart or something.
There you go, there's a fun idea. It's the new number 1. Great, that's all I had today.
Councilor Gaspar?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Corson. Just building on that question about that one area that we walked by with the planters, the plan is to pull down the fences on that?
Correct, yes. So that area should be opened up for the public in a few weeks, and then people who are enjoying the waterfront walkway will be able to come around the Gabriel Terminal, join this interim walkway section, go around One Port Drive, and then walk all the way down towards the Port Authority.
So that big area in the center of it, that'll be open for access as well, or will we?
For pedestrian access, absolutely, yeah. So that's where the interim uses would fit quite nicely.
And then, I guess, following up on that, do we have any ideas of interim use of putting something in there as opposed to just being sort of like a blank space, or even keeping the fence, like moving the fences so that pathways are open, but that chunk of land is not open?
So the plan at the moment is to have it open for people to walk around. We will come back to report for interim uses and
Okay.
We'll run those by you.
Okay.
Mr. Corson, I have a question. The interim walkway that we saw today, I actually didn't see where it terminated. Does it go across the rail lines and down to cruise ship terminal?
Correct. It doesn't go as far as the cruise ship terminal, but it does crosses the tracks.
Comes all the way down here and continues south.
Okay. So the idea that when we have cruise ships in port, they don't need to go on the pylon, Irwin side or Esplanade. They can
Correct.
take
So
it.
that was one of the key
Okay.
motivations for this, was to create a much more enjoyable pedestrian environment. It's not, again, it's interim, like we don't have street trees down there, but it's certainly a substantial improvement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And as Mr. Lindsay mentioned, we're not going to speak a lot, but we wanted to make sure this council is aware of the draft Vail Sutton site plan. Previous council received the draft late 2017, and then asked us to go out and have some community responses, which the communities at the time had all responded, and also go for public review. So we've done all that, and it's not a lot of changes from that, other than the fact that people want us to bring it back for adoption, which we'll do. But we just want to make sure you're aware of it, as it is on the fringe of the downtown, but definitely an aspect of the downtown. So I'll hand this one around just in case the council hasn't seen it as I'm speaking. But this is the draft plan. This updates the 2008 master plan from the Vail Sutton Park. And the difference on this one was two main things. One is, if council remembers, there was some property brought back into the city that was initially to be condo sites. That's where the parking lot area is, this white area here. Also, there's a desire for us to look at Queen Elizabeth Promenade improvements, as well as Georgia Park improvements. So this plan captures all of that. So we are going to try and bring this back to you. We're still working with some of our stakeholders, particularly SFN and Port Authority, on some final aspects of what they want to do with their properties before we bring it back. So we still like to do some of that. SFN has a piece of property there, but also their connection to Secession with the ferry dock and such like there. We see some work we want to do with that. That being said, we are doing some improvements already this year. The playground will start being improved. Council's also approved the Peace Park that will be improved, again, in coinciding with the playground update. But I'll just quickly mention just a couple of key components. The plan doesn't really blow a lot of things up. People really wanted to see more amenity improvements, so such like as the playground. So some key themes are improved access and connectivity, create connections with wider city trail network, improve access to the park with further parking and transit connections, or were the main theme. Park amenity improvements, new and improved washrooms. And one of the comments there is, rather than just one location, could we do it at a few locations? So maybe some washrooms on Queen Elizabeth Promenade, more out in the point. Playground improvements, which we're doing the performance space, so improving some of the performance space rather than removing it, adding some to the Lions Pavilion, and maybe providing some other options for performance spaces. Water fountains, outdoor shower, more food options, expanding of the public art program down there, signage improvements. And one of the ones that was really key on this one, which also fits council's strategic priorities, is the desire to do more ecological enhancements, particularly in the Millstone area. So you'll notice there's a lot in the plan about stopping the riprap, doing enhancements, creating islands, working with the DFO and those types of processes, as well as the possibility of naturalizing the lagoon a little bit more. How do we make it more of a natural feature? So those are some of the key ones. Again, we will hope to bring it back for final adoption. Again, council has received it a couple times, and it's one of those ones that continues to go on a bit, but we are starting some of the improvement. If there's any questions.
Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you. Through you to Mr. Harding. I was just wondering what the driving force behind removing the potential for condos there was between the two plans.
It was two councils ago made the motion to bring it back in and designate it as parking. They are designated as parking.
Okay. And was that in response to community feedback or just through a planning process, or it was just a decision made?
It was definitely a more controversial issue when it was initially put to the Nanaimo Center, and the council at the time, as we were starting to go down the road of doing different improvements, they made the motion to bring it back in.
Sorry, a clarifying piece, and then we have another question. What section of land are you talking about?
So if you look on, it's basically where the current parking is now.
Oh, okay.
These two, they're shown up on the concept plans, the gray area. Those were the lands that brought in. If you remember when the actual roadway was brought in, all the services were brought in, both to service the SFN property and also to service the park, but also to service future development. So there was a lot of servicing in there, as well as teeing off the intersection where it is now.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe and then Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, Mr. Harding. First, are we backing away from the idea of expanding the sandy beach, or is that still in the new visioning?
It is, and that's that naturalization. So both on the edges of the lagoon, but also how do we make the water? What we're finding is there's lots of visual connection to the water, but there's not a lot of physical connection to the water. So how can you, on both, as it's been a filled site, how can you do more softening on this area, but also with the lagoon, can we kind of bring back the cement wall on the end of the lagoon, and bring it back in so it's more of a walking right into the beach, as well as how do we do some softening of the edges.
And secondly, I'm going to, as I warned you, I would bring up the P word, and I'd like you to speak briefly to the challenges of parking, because that, as I was told numerous times last weekend and the weekend before, that site is so popular for our July marine events, and very, very limited parking even for people with disabilities. And it's a shame when people decide not to come downtown and be part of an event because they know they cannot find a nearby parking spot.
As I mentioned too, the park has close to 200 events a year. It's a very active park. The parking is what it was before. We haven't really taken anything away. We haven't really added anything. The option, when we do bring it back to council's final decision, there's options for improvements of parking in an existing parking area, if you so choose to. Realistically, the only way to do that is to go up or down, which, like, given it's full site, be going up. So if council wanted to do more of a parkade type of options there, they were there. The plan also, though, talks about more improved. We'll never have enough parking for the events that are there. That's you'll never have that. So all the events that we do have there, people do walk in from, or we work with transit, but those are options of that's one of the mentions to it also is improving the accessibility along the walkways throughout the old city area or the downtown areas, those connectivities to the park. But you can also increase. The only other way is take away some of the other park to add more parking, which is not recommended in the plan. But realistically is what you can do with existing parking to improve it, and that's really just to go up or work. What we've been trying to work with some of the major events. So remember when we had the torch relay there and Hometown Hockey was working with transit. Actually, people would park in other locations, and we'd have shuttle buses to the events. So there's many ways of encouraging more access to the location, but parking is an option, and it is an option in the actual plan.
Thank you, Chair, for indulging me. We talked, and maybe this is more for Mr. Lindsay, when we were downtown, some specific sites and what the development or non-development plans were for them. Is there any word on the Howard Johnson site, being in that it's adjacent to the park and could provide an alternate access point to the park, which it does, but only to a very, very minor degree now?
Certainly no, I can confirm there's no active applications with Howard Johnson. We have had discussions with the current property owner going back over the past months and years about that site. And absolutely, we would see whatever happens on that site to have a very strong link. And of course, there's the trail that goes underneath the bridge now, but the opportunity to extend and formalize what would become then the river network of trails that would go up and border that site. So people are on that site, whether it's a hotel in the future, commercial, multifamily uses or other, would really have that opportunity to provide movement between the park and the site. Sorry, no active proposals from staff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, mine was about parking too, because we hear from people all the time that they don't go down because there isn't parking, and we've lost quite a few parking lots recently. And they've been using the Howard Johnson, which is going to be off limits soon if it does go. And then I've noticed too that all the private parking lots now are stopping people from parking in there. Like I don't know if it's on the weekend where no parking and they're actually having it enforced and towing vehicles. So I think it's going to become a big issue. If we want to build on that, we're going to have to find places for people to park. Same thing with downtown. That's one of the big issues you hear from people. I don't go down there because I can't get parking.
So in just Cam, the chair, we had previous leased parking from Howard Johnson. So there's opportunities again to do those types of things when we wanted to, as some of the other changes have happened.
Okay, Councillor Gasselbaum.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Harding. Just question on swimming. In terms of water quality, is the water clean for swimming? I'm just curious because the amount that I expect people to use that site for swimming, I don't see as much. And I was just curious to hear Councillor Thorpe talk about beach enhancement and to talk a little bit more about that in terms of bringing in more sand.
There is more demand or requests for improved sandy beach. There are people swimming there. The water is tested. It is a flush system, so we've had a few blooms there, but again, that doesn't necessarily affect the water quality. Maybe the visibility definitely, but not the quality. And those are some of the things we're looking at about accesses. There's the lagoon component, but particularly at the very end of Elizabeth Promenade by the breakwater there. It's another popular place for people to go in.
And then potentially we could bring sand in there.
Potentially, yes. We hadn't really thought of that one. That's more of an idea of some informal kayak launches and things like that.
Okay.
But we do also do that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Mr. Harding. Some of the events have been downtown in Fail Sutton Park. There's garbage is becoming a bit of an issue. Typically, there's one garbage can and everything gets thrown into it. Is there any plans in the future to have participants utilizing recycling waste and trash bins?
There's been a few events that those have been promoted and actually done. In fact, one of the city teams was there for the hometown hockey one, doing an example of that. And there's also been some volunteers on other ones. It's one we could expand on with the groups. We do provide some recycling opportunities for them. So, but the event organizers are responsible for clearing out their garbage and getting into the bins. But I think that's one of those educational things we need to continue to work with all of us, with particular special events, and how we can provide some of that recycling.
So, if I may, would the process be then is that we would require people using the park to use those types of bins, but we would supply them, or they have to supply them, or?
Well, just providing the actual containers isn't that difficult. It's the sorting that's the big issue, and then getting that sorting done and then put them into the location. So it's really providing the sorting locations for them. But it's something we can look more on. Like I say, we've had a few good pilot projects down there. We'll go back and see what we did for Canada Day. We've had it for Canada Day also. To see what we're doing. That's our event, so we'll see what we're doing and making sure we're doing what's right. If we can enhance that, we definitely can look at that.
Thanks.
Thank you. And Mr. Harding, a question of my own. So I heard you say earlier that we sometimes work with transit to alleviate the parking pressures when there's a big event. Is that something we generally offer if an event is of a certain size, or is it built on relationship? Is it something we offer regardless?
It's really based on the size of the event. I'm not sure what Dragon Boat's doing, for example, if they're communicating with them. But we'll look and ask, working with some of our larger events, see what's going on. For example, if snowbirds come back, should we try and do those types of communications with them? And then the other one is working with them with the special events. Some have done it, particularly the boat show I know has done it, where they have shuttles. So we'll have parking at Bowen Park, and then they'll provide shuttle buses to get people to them, because they definitely didn't have the park. So part of it's those types of improvements.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Harding.
Good afternoon. I want to spend a few minutes talking about public safety downtown. I was telling a few people on the tour this morning that I just flew in from Chicago about 1 o'clock this morning. Didn't realize I was speaking to someone improvised a little bit. But I actually, my experience there, I think was quite significant to what I have to talk to you about today. I was watching the news when I flew in on Monday, and there had been 45 shootings in the city that weekend. Took a train downtown, and Chicago's downtown gets 30 million visitors a year. And it's beautiful, robust downtown to see anywhere in the world. And last year, I took my holidays in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. Baltimore has a murder rate that's equivalent in a year to Canada's. Went to the mall in D.C. and made the mistake of going 2 blocks downtown off the mall, and I thought, dear God, it was the worst mistake I made in my life. I almost didn't make it back out. So there were 2 big urban American cities, and Y is one that has about 20 million people in it. And you go down there in D.C., if you see it's a prosperous, and another one is just an absolute urban dead zone. And I think the answer to it was a comment that Jamie Rose made on the tour this morning. He said, don't be afraid of congestion. Busy streets, vibrant streets are city streets, and a lot of the successful urban centers that we see in North America, like Chicago, I figured that out, even though they have crushing crime rates and organized crime and everything else. And I think those are kind of the lessons and the messages that I want to share, and I think most of the times here can speak to it far better than I can. But I'll take it back to the context of my experience here as a police officer. I came here 15 years ago. Kind of my task when I came here was to deal with our downtown core, which, by the way, 15 years ago, it socially and economically collapsed. There was a social services study done, and the identified area called the Lycan area was basically Victoria Crescent, Albert Street, Dunsmuir, Cavan, and that was the epicenter of our downtown core that had collapsed. Studied it and worked on it a lot, and I can tell you at the time that our storefront vacancy rate at that time was more than 50%. The lease rates for businesses downtown were a third to a quarter of what they were in other economic areas of the city, and there were no takers for that. Our downtown was collapsed. We had a prominent organized crime presence. We had over 16 liquor primary establishments, over 3,000 seats, and organized crime that had taken a foothold. So when I look at where we are today, actually, we're very, very successful. Our downtown is far more vibrant and so much better than what it was then. Really what characterized downtown when we came here, Councillor Armstrong could probably attest to some of the same experiences as a police officer, was an over-concentration of things that cause stress, over-concentration of derelict empty buildings, over-concentration of fringe businesses. And by fringe businesses, I mean the ones that kind of bring the types of crowds and type of activity that you know, like payday loans and massage parlors, those types of things, and an over-concentration of intensive social services. So our downtown had tipped, and a high crime rate came with it. We did a lot of things. I don't have the time really to say how we came out of it, but we're doing a lot better there right now. But we're starting to tip back a little bit, and some of the successes that we did 10 or 15 years, I think we got a little bit complacent as a community. And I just want to highlight 2 or 3 features that I see and where I think the risks are from a public safety perspective, particularly as it relates to downtown. Number 1, of course, is homelessness. The west coast of North America has a homelessness phenomena that other parts of the country don't have, and it's driven by 2 main factors. One is the very moderate climate, maybe some of the liberal values, but also the high cost of living that's associated with the West Coast. And if you ever want to see trends, you just look at the United States, and usually what happens in big centers down there, it usually hits here about 20 years later. So homelessness hit LA a big way 20 years ago, and I know they did a recent census, and the LA County has 56,000 homeless people in it. They've substantially given up a lot of their downtown urban areas because of the blight of homelessness and the crushing social impacts it have. But the next one to fall was Portland, and we used to, I can tell you, 15 years ago, use Portland as the flagship example of how to do social housing right. They followed LA, and now most recently we're seeing Seattle go through the same things. A lot of people talk about a documentary that's on Netflix or on YouTube now.
Seattle's dying.
Seattle's dying. Worth having a look at, because a lot of those threads are what we're seeing in British Columbia now. Homelessness isn't just a blight in Nanaimo, but all of the large and medium-sized cities in British Columbia. I can tell you that in some of the earlier meetings that I've spoken to you, that our numbers are winding up exponentially. We did a point-in-time count in 2016, and we counted 174. Less than 18 months later, we did another one in the spring of 2018, and it was up to 335. This is just a real quick, rough count. We know we don't capture the whole numbers in a day, and we also don't count people that couch surf and everything else. Later that year, we had the largest tent city in British Columbia. We now have 2 sites that we have to deal with, but we know even with the 2 temporary sites we have that we think that our homeless populations are probably 300 to 500, again, notwithstanding what we put in social housing. I can tell you that the homelessness is spread widely through the community, but it's substantially concentrated in our downtown core. Why is it? Because that's where our built environment, that's where the public spaces are, where people can roam, settle, shelter, etc. This is typically where we're in proximity to food and shelter, harm reduction services, where a lot of our best parks and green spaces are, a lot of doorways, a lot of public infrastructure like bridges. These are the types of features in the community that attract and can anchor homeless populations. So we as a community have to be really creative and mindful of those things, and how we can A, control those spaces, and B, how we can also manage the services that are associated with it, the intensive services, which I'm going to touch on for a minute. So what comes with homelessness? I'm not going to say that everybody that is homeless is a criminal, but the different populations that we have that are homeless, addictions, mental illness are very prevalent in it. And what you see often with that is open drug use, weapons, theft, and petty crime that goes with it, and a lot of public disorder issues. And it's often tied with the mental illness and the addictions. People behave bizarrely, they frighten people, and the more concentrated it is in a public area, it often takes only 1 or 2 bad encounters downtown before your citizens don't want to come downtown anymore because they don't feel very safe. And that's a little bit of the tipping point where we're seeing again soliciting or panhandling, discarded needles. Hard to get people in your parks if people don't feel safe because of the discarded harm reduction supplies. Some of the councillors have been asking questions recently, and I think they're excellent about the fire hazards. We're into extreme fire conditions, and I'd say that when we talk about so many things like smoking bylaws to mitigate discarded cigarettes, I'd say the number one risk of interface fire, particularly in our downtown core, is affiliated with homeless encampments, people that are taking fires, food and warmth, etc. That's where we're finding most of our incidents. And the other thing that homelessness does downtown is it puts a lot of pressure on your daytime public facilities. Not so much this time of year because it's warm, people congregate outside. But in the winter months, you're going to see a great concentration of people that are going to go into other places, your restaurants, your libraries, etc. And you put too much stress on these things with unintended uses, and that's where you're going to find that people really don't want to come downtown anymore. Talk briefly about intensive social services. I understand while I was out of town, there was a lot of discussion on the overdose prevention site and maybe transition to the safe consumption site. I will never say or argue that intensive social services are a bad thing. Actually, they're very needed, but you have to be very thoughtful and intentional about them. If it's not done right, they will contribute to the social and economic collapse of neighborhoods if you don't do them in a thoughtful way. Here I'm talking about meal programs or shelters, or health centers. Next to Sark here we have Harris Health Center. It's a needle exchange, harm reduction supplies. They do a lot more than that. But there you have a needle exchange and an overdose prevention site, social housing, all in one street. And you've got a big derelict building in there. You've put a tremendous number of things that put a lot of stress on it. And cumulatively, that's where you now have an area that's socially collapsed, much like the Vican area downtown did 10 or 15 years ago. Where do you get in these areas? That's where your vulnerable street populations are going to congregate. They're in proximity to services. It's also part of a hierarchy or culture. I talked to the councillors that went on the tour this morning about neighborhood tipping points. The way I describe that is when an area lacks social controls and other measures of guardianship that are informally needed to control crime and disorder, that's when a tipping point occurs. And I used the analogy this morning of a lake. Fish swim around, plants grow, you put fertilizer, you put all sorts of things that contaminate and pollute that, and that environment continues to thrive and be normal. You pollute it too long, and at a certain point you have these catastrophic changes where everything dies off and that whole ecostructure dies. Well, our experience in policing is that neighborhoods have tipping points just like any other environments. You put too many things that cause stress, and suddenly you have this monumental shift in an area. People just basically give up and they abandon those areas. And what you'll find is that the social norms will not be dictated by the society and the expectations of civil society by your street cultures. And I can tell you, and we saw it with the Vicant area, and you see it more and more in the Gastown areas, that even vibrant, thriving economic areas around areas that tipped cannot thrive because that decay just keeps radiating outward, and it becomes a significant social blight over time. So those are neighborhood tipping points. I want to touch on one other feature that I mentioned a few times in the talk today, because I know the planning folks are talking a great deal about connectivity and transportation and flows. There's one phenomenon that we've always noticed in our downtown core. Councillor Armstrong and I have spoken about this a number of times, and that's urban dead zones. It's the idea of areas that lack program uses or robust street activity. And we talked about it, some of them on the tour today. Sometimes there are things that you wouldn't ordinarily think of, and the example that we've always given was Skinner Street. So Skinner Street is kind of the heart of our nighttime entertainment club district. It has 5 nightclubs on it. They're all windowless, no program during the day. The street's empty, and at night there's 1,200 licensed streets. So you have 2 different worlds in the daytime and the nighttime. Now think of your grandmother that wants to go down and have a meal on Commercial Street or go to a store. Is she going to cut through Skinner Street to go up to the Old City Corridor across the Bastion Bridge to go up there? And the answer is no, because you have these dead zones in here, or there's no malignant or benign program in design there. There's no positive good use of those streets. And we have those by the fact that we have areas like that. We have the travel corridor of the Old Island Highway. Imagine going up from the firehouse scroll up to the top of the street there. Who would walk up there? The grades are too steep. There's no, people don't go there because there's no storefronts. There's nothing. These are urban dead zones, and what that is breaks up the flow and connectivity. We do so much to try to create flow and good use, robust use. But what you'll find is people will go to a night market on Commercial Street, but they'll be inhibited from looking at the other amenities. So the whole downtown core does not flourish from a lot of hard work to do that type of programming. The last one I'll touch on is
Mr. Burge, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could we just have a question before you go on to your
No,
next
it's always
point?
done.
Okay, great, thanks.
down at Crawl Plaza, we'll all kind of make fun about the lack of successful program that we haven't been able to achieve over the years. But there's a beautiful built infrastructure. We failed to put the restaurants and storefronts and things where people front and interact. It's this urban dead zone. I always found it curious as a police officer when you saw 800 people go to the Port Theater and they'd float to where they parked throughout the downtown core, and everyone would always take a wide berth around down at Crawl Plaza, even though it was most straight and direct route. And it's kind of telling them in the centers that are supposed to be gathering spots are things that people actively avoid and flow through. Just something to think about. It's all about design, and I think those things are readily fixable, but I just want to kind of introduce that idea of urban dead zones. We have quite a few of them downtown. I'll just finish off there. I've talked a lot about the neighborhood tipping points, but I don't think you ever want to lose sight of some of the small details. Going back to what I said, is those small expressions of community, expression of guardianship, the blight, so small things that show stress, signs of disorder, graffiti. We really have to look at the small details that reinforce the lack of social disorder. Sometimes some of the small ones that are there are being very organized and developed to make sure that things are kept clean, that we clean our streets, our sidewalks, keep everything trimmed up and looking nice. And it certainly shows that these are well-used areas. I know there was a lot of comments from the old city quarter about the hanging baskets and just how nicely everything was manicured there. But that certainly sends a very powerful signal whether that street is busy or not, that it's cared for, that people respect it, use it, that will look after it. And these are some of the important points that we can get. So maybe I'll stop it there. I can go all day, but just maybe a few questions.
Councillor Armstrong?
I have two for you. When you're talking about keeping the homeless sort of in one area, and I know there's been a movement in this community to disperse them in different areas. I was talking to the head of Toronto Vice, and they're obviously dead set against that now because all it's done is create bill wars and turf wars for the thing. What would you say, would we be looking at that here if we were to keep dispersing them around, or being that we're a smaller city? But I know that's a huge concern for them. And Vancouver's saying the same thing now. You have the police in Vancouver refusing to go to Oppenheimer Park without at least 4 officers. And I think it's going to get worse.
Well, really good questions on a number of fronts. My concern is when it's concentrated that you're going to cause blight and you're going to cause tipping. And the best example we have recently is our tent city. Look at the type of substantive crime, the disorder, and the people that were suffering most in that high concentration were the homeless people themselves. We're having stabbings and fires and violence, a lot of predatory behavior. Organically, a lot of these folks on the street don't intersperse organically. They'll go out and particularly much more high functioning people that are more poor rather than steeped in addictions and mental illness. They'll gravitate far away. I'll tell you that the green spaces everywhere in the city have people in them, and people you have in the North End tend to, a lot of them are in sobriety, but live much differently than the ones you'll see closer to the downtown core. I think more to finish off, the point is we have to be really mindful and thoughtful as we look at some of the strategies and look to acquire properties to build proper supported and affordable housing, that we do it in a mindful way that spreads it out broadly throughout the community. The city, I'm saying we changed the zoning 12 to 15 years ago to accommodate that, and I think the examples of the social housing we created on Wesley and then Uplands and then Boundary and the success we've had there bodes well to having small, well-managed, well-built places for us.
It's interesting you talk about tipping point, because my neighborhood's a tipping point where we're hiring our own security guards, and that's the North End because they're done, they're fed up. But now my other point is, you talked about the safe consumption sites, and I know that, like I was one that voted against using our zoning control because I didn't believe that the government nor VHA will do proper consultation, because they never have. You and I both know that. We've never seen it. Don't believe it'll ever happen. Are you concerned about that happening? I know when I talked to Superintendent Miller, he's quite concerned about that and the added resources that it's going to place on his department because of that.
That's a really good question, and there's not a straightforward answer. I mean, I spoke to some of the folks on the tour this morning. I think that the opioid crisis and the emergency that's started in this province will probably last through the lifetime of everybody in this room. The province can always have through that emergency, they can always have an OPS. They can have 10 of them in the city if they want. The one thing I think that we figured out over the last couple of years is whatever additional funding or support infrastructure that might have come with a safe consumption site, I think those days are past. And I think really the only designation, switch the designation from a OPS, which is under the provincial emergency, and a licensed federally exempted site is the permanence of it. So really, Island Health can create a SCS and they can move on and not have to worry, about having to change it up. But the scope and the impacts in the neighborhood aren't going to change between an OPS and an SCS. And I think regardless of where it is, it's going to create some stresses and challenges. And I think we all collectively as a community have to hold the health authority up to a high capacity. I'm going to get a...
There's some subtle hints going on, but we do have a bunch of questions, so if you could just sit tight for a moment.
How many dead zones of significance do you think are the kind of dead zones that could create that get to the tipping point scenario do you think we have in the city? Do you have a list?
Tipping points are really more about the concentration of things. I think there are quite a few dead zones that are in downtown core, and it's telling by the fact when I first came here there used to be 4 business improvement areas downtown.
Yeah.
It's all because you had these clusters of areas that had some solidarity and combined interests, and I don't know that the old city corridor really relates to the needs of Commercial Street because of those zones between them. So thinking of kind of those mindsets, why do we have pockets of good, robust, successful activity and dead areas between them? And those are the areas we should really be thinking about how we can create good flow through them.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Well, thank you, Chair. Not the most uplifting report today, but I'm going to call you out on a few things. If you know that we have neighborhood tipping points, and you can recognize them, then we should be able to mitigate them not tipping. So I would expect from those people in the know to receive information on how, A, we might have a problem in a particular neighborhood, and here's the best way to mitigate it and bring it back the other way. And if we already know about dead zones and how they come about, I would also like to see staff suggestions on how we can make those dead zones not dead zones anymore, or make it to the point where they don't become dead zones in the first place. So those are the things I'd be looking for. And you raised this one, I didn't. It was cleaning up of the streets. We were walking down Church, heading towards Front Street. And I noticed a whole bunch of shrubs growing out of the crack between the building and the sidewalk. And little things about this big. So I asked Harding, who's responsible for those, and he said it was the building owners responsible for them. So as part of going around to a site, it's these little things that people notice, right? They may not notice the lovely expanse of seawall. They'll notice that there's this entire block has got weeds growing along the buildings, right? So that's, I think that falls under your department. So I was kind of hoping that these sort of things would be enforced more in our city so that people don't notice the weeds growing up in our sidewalks.
50 more bylaw officers.
Very good points, and weeds I can address very quickly. The property maintenance bylaw addresses noxious weeds that are a nuisance, and the definition of nuisance basically means that they're like blackberry, Himalayan blackberries that grow over and start encroaching on neighbors' property and causing hazards. We don't enforce bylaws for aesthetics, so I mean, really, unless it meets the definition of what's a true nuisance, then we don't deal with it. And there's a real slippery slope of starting to enforce aesthetics, because as Councillor Armstrong says, I'll need 200 bylaw officers if we want everybody to cut their lawns and keep things to a high standard. As far as the tipping points, the real challenge in these things is that we as the municipality and staff don't control a lot of the variables that cause areas to tip, i.e. the school district has the big, dead zone area, and they don't have money to deal with it. And then you have intensive services that are managed by Island Health and the province. And we have many conversations. What we have are the policing resources, I suppose that you could really robustly send the police in there and try to break that up, but then it's the peril of where do you want to move them to, and sometimes unless you have a plan B on how to manage those populations, do you manage them in sight, or do you unwittingly push them on a commercial street or on the old city quarter? So there are many factors that have to be considered.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Despite Mr. Rose's hints, we could listen to Mr. LaBerge all afternoon. It's very interesting, even if it isn't always uplifting. I do have a question for you, but before I do that, I'm going to challenge council to consider our terminology, because I hear a lot of talk about we have a homeless problem. Homelessness downtown is causing increased crime, and it's causing drug use and so on. And I think that's doing a disservice to a portion of our population which is homeless through basically no fault of their own. And I'm talking about fixed income seniors who are faced with rent increases suddenly, and they have a problem. Or low income young families that are struggling to get into the housing market or even the rental market. So I would suggest that yes, we have a homelessness problem, but it's caused mainly by an addiction problem. And that's what's behind the social unrest that we see, I think, in our downtown, in my opinion, at least to a large extent. And when we talk about needing to address homelessness, yes, that may well be. But I think there's a chemical dependency problem that is a much bigger issue that needs to be addressed. And that's where it's frustrating, because of course that's not our mandate. But that's just my little ramble. My question is this, because we've had emails from members of the public who suggest that we should be looking at a bylaw similar to the Penticton, I think it's Kelowna bylaw, basically about anti-loitering. And I'm just curious about your take on that or your response to that.
I appreciate your comments, and I would concur with everything you said. I'm not specifically familiar with the bylaws you're referring to. Safe to say that we can't have loitering vagrancy bylaws. Canada used to have vagrancy laws, and they were repealed in the early 1970s, even 10 years before the charter. They're not constitutional. You can't have them. We have a variation. I suspect that probably what they've done is something similar to what we already have, and that is laying chattels or belongings or behaving in a manner that obstructs the other people's use of sidewalks, of roadways, of private property. So the example would be if you had a backpack and a blanket and you laid it out on the street in front of the art gallery and laid out, and people had to take this wide berth around. It's called an obstruction of chattel. So we can, by our bylaws, force them to gather them up and pack them and allow other people to have unfettered access and use of our public spaces. And that's probably under the community charter the extent of what we can regulate in those types of spheres of activities.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do have that here. That's why when they asked for it, it's already here.
Thank you, Mr. LaBarge. Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Those thoughtful comments.
I think I'm already 5 minutes over time, so this is going to be very quick. So transportation downtown. Our transportation mobility, our transportation master plan talked about focusing and densifying land use to our mobility hubs. So the downtown is obviously one of them. What that suggests is that we have areas where people can live, work, and play. So we already have the bones of that in our downtown. And with that, what we then need to drive to is to promote our active transportation. We need to provide better connectivity, better support for cycling and transit, and making our public spaces, not just a sidewalk, not just a bike route, but actually making them places that people want to be. Creating situations like the downtown night market, where we have people coming and gathering and living downtown. And we saw the intersection of Albert and Wallace today, and I did make the comment it was busy, but it's also vibrant. People are going to the coffee shop, people are grabbing lunch. It is a downtown core, and we want to support it. So through the transportation master plan, several projects were identified as priorities for the downtown core. We've got a map over here. I'm just going to quickly point to it and talk about it. So a cycling loop around downtown. I've referred to it as a cycle track, a bike route, a bikeway. Those are all very specific types of facilities, but the nuts and bolts of it is we want to provide a facility for people to cycle around downtown. This will let them link into the Gabriola Ferry, the Waterfront Walkway, Stewart Avenue, the ENN, Albert Fourth out to the VIU, and south out to Halliburton or Old Victoria Road to connect into areas south of town. We've also got several intersections that we're looking at, some because we need to look at the condition of the traffic signals, some because they are quite awkward, going back to the intersections of Albert Victoria and Commercial and Terminal and Gordon and Terminal. It's a cluster of intersections that have just sort of organically grown together, but we have an opportunity right now to look at those and see what we can do. So looking at all of these projects, we also have the ENN, we have a Milton Street Bikeway, we have the Gabriola Ferry Terminal, which is outside of our control. We also have the Terminal Nickel report, which we're reviewing. So all of these projects were coming up for design and construction and acting on them. But we wanted to make sure that they came together in a complete package. We didn't want them to come together ad hoc and have a disconnect or not have everything supporting each other. The other key one that I forgot to mention was siting a transit exchange. We've had a temporary transit exchange at Prideaux for 15 years, and it was temporary 15 years ago, and it's still there. But we need to determine where the best location is for a transit focal point in our downtown core. So the Downtown Mobility Project was conceived to look at all of these projects, look at all of these opportunities. We have a lot of development going on downtown right now. There's going to be a huge change when some of these buildings are complete, and we need to make sure that our transportation system supports all of these modes. And so right now we've finished our phase one stakeholder engagement. So we've done pop-up engagements, we've done online surveys, and we've done some targeted stakeholder engagement with businesses and users from downtown. So we're in the process of gathering that information and processing it. We've also done a data collection for a parking study that we're doing. So with that, we're looking at supply and demand. We're also looking at pricing and how our parkades influence the on-street and what makes the most sense for long-term, short-term, and medium-term. And we're also looking at, like I said, we have the idea of having a loop cycle network. We're looking at what makes sense for the type of facility there and how it traverses all of the intersections. We're also looking at, with that, we're looking at opportunities to improve pedestrian connectivity. So right now we've kind of got everything west of Terminal, we've got everything east of Terminal. We want to try and find ways to bring all of these things together and allow people to walk throughout the entire area. So right now we're gathering this information. We've had the stakeholder engagement. We've got some really good feedback. Somebody wants us to open up the tunnel back to protection in Newcastle. So I'm not sure if we're going there. And once we've reviewed all this data and got all the recommendations for our consultant, we're going to be bringing a report back to you guys in the fall with a formal update, and there will be some decision points there. And so we're going to be looking for some guidance from you guys at that point. So in less than 5 minutes, that's the plan.
Justin, any questions? Councilor Armstrong?
I'm really interested in when we're going to get that transit hub moved. Do you guys have a timeline on that, working with the RDM to move from the Prideaux Street, the exchange, sorry? Like from Prideaux, like full-time back downtown?
Permanently,
Yeah.
right now. So
Well, I don't know if it's going to go right there, but the downtown area, yeah.
So I envision a recommendation in our report in the fall saying we recommend.
Because we've heard nothing, at least me, I've heard nothing but positive about that relocation.
And anecdotally, I would say that it's all positive right now. I think what it looks like, we're still tinkering with. It's going to be an on-street. We need to figure out how to make sure that functions correctly with all of the other interactions. But that's
Thank you.
I'll jump in and ask, I haven't had a chance to look closely at this, but I'm assuming that that's kind of, if this is all completed, that's kind of best practice, tied in a bow. Downtown is looking good for active transportation. And I'm curious if the report coming to us in the fall is going to identify kind of, here's where you would think we should start first and how much that's going to cost us, or like what are our decision points in the fall going to be around implementing this?
the decision points. The big one is going to be around the transit exchange. The next ones are going to be probably around some of the more topical intersections like Albert and Victoria Crescent. And from that, what we then need to do is start getting into more functional integration. So at this point, we're basically going to be bringing back to you guys an update on what we're hearing and where we think we should go, and give you guys the opportunity to say, yes, stay the course, or divert one way or the other. So.
All right, thank you. Councilor Barr.
Thank you. That was actually almost my entire question there, is how are we going to be able to see this plan prior to it coming to us as we recommend you do the following?
So we're now getting into the second phase of our stakeholder engagement. So there will be more opportunities to see how it's evolving. Those haven't been planned yet, but they're.
Thank you.
I think if I may follow up on that, I was speaking with Mr. Lindsay on the walk and talking about how Front Street as a 4-lane, kind of highway, we all recognize probably isn't great. So when we get the decision points in the fall, is that going to be an opportunity for us to say we actually want to prioritize that over something else in the downtown?
Yeah, so one of the things that's going to be presented, I mean, it's already in documents that have been approved, but there are a number of projects that have been put in the capital plan and approved in the capital plan. So we can discuss whether they accelerate or whether they sidetrack or defer them at that point. But what we will have is we'll have some of the options as to what styles, for example, Front Street, what type of cycling. So do you want a cycle track? Do you want a dedicated bike lane? Do you want a giant multi-use path? Which of those? And then we can talk about what that means for implementations.
Great, thank you. No further questions?
Not one more.
Okay.
When you talk about that Front Street one, are you going to talk to the bus drivers about that? Because I know they get frustrated with some of that because it sends their routes back in time because they want to keep it for, obviously, because it's much better for them.
Sorry, the exchange location?
No, the actual Front Street. Like when it comes to that time, is that one of your stakeholders you'll engage with?
Yeah. So throughout this, we've been working with the ministry, with the RDN, emergency services, everybody's been involved in conversations.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Lindsay, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. That was a good kind of segue because a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, the 4 speakers we had today, they're all, within them are decision points that are going to be coming back to council, and you heard in detail what's going to come back about active transportation. So Mr. Corson will be bringing back a report to you on One Port Drive in the near future to talk about short and long-term uses, so we'll be looking for some direction on that. Mr. LeBerge talked a lot about social issues in the downtown. I have to say, I think I sent him an email about 6 o'clock this morning saying he was talking. So
I should have been
I should give more heads up maybe next time. But the one thing we didn't get to in that conversation, and it is a decision point coming back to council, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. LeBerge, is the community police station on Victoria Crescent. So we're going to be coming back to council seeking your direction on the decision on that. So that's going to be coming forward to council. So again, and also with Mr. Harding with his plan, coming back to council for adoption. So we see those all happening in the near future. Running a little bit behind time, and like I said earlier, we wanted to devote a big part of today to talking about your ideas about what's next and kind of where do we go, just in terms of implementation of many of these plans. But one thing I was sitting there thinking about, and amongst the documents over here is the 2002 downtown plan. And this was one we hired, some of you may know the name Ray Spaxman, and Mr. Spaxman was a longtime director at the City of Vancouver and one of the people recognized with putting Vancouver onto the path of where it is today. So a very well-respected planner. He did the work for us, and I remember sitting in a boardroom much like this with many people in the community, and Mr. Spaxman was very much saying at the time, what you need to do is move people back into your downtown. It's no longer the place for commerce. It's no longer the center for office and MO. What you need to do is bring people back. And somebody turned to him and said, well, what's our target? Like, how many units should we, what should our goal be, Mr. Spaxman? And he said, well, I think one would be a really good start. So that was 2002, right? And so that time between, I can't say that immediately we started seeing residential downtown, but we're certainly starting to see it now. And I talked to you last week about a number of investments in the community. A good chunk of those are downtown. A good part of the conversations we have every day are with people looking at developing and investing in our downtown. So this idea of bringing people back into the downtown, I think we're on a good path. But I think with that idea of a high-density city comes with it the responsibility of having a high-amenity city. And they very much go hand in hand. And Vancouver is a great example where they've got that high density, but they very much have that high amenity space. And I think we talked today about all the things we're doing and working on, but I do think there needs to be some attention paid to sort of that public realm element as we move forward. And we talked a little bit about that today in our walk and where those opportunities are for public realm improvements. And I do think that it ties in very well to the issues that Mr. Laberge has raised, as well as others here this afternoon. So for us, when we think about opportunities, that's very much one that we put on here is, I think there's this idea that we could come forward is not something that we're currently working on in any significant way. I would say that there has been sort of this philosophy and change in the downtown of how we look at our streets and our sidewalks. In the time I've worked here at the city, and at one time we did not want commercial businesses coming out on the sidewalk. We didn't want their signs there. We didn't want tables there. Certainly didn't want people eating there. We tried to discourage that from happening. It was very much a change a number of years ago. We've done everything we can to bring that life back onto the street. We recognize if you want to have people downtown, the first thing you need to have is visible people. So we started off in what I would describe as some people talk about lighter, quicker, cheaper ways to do things. And if you remember, a few years ago, we experimented with things like temporary public spaces and took over some parking spaces. But even going back a little further, like the area in front of the Modern Cafe, if people don't recall, that was actually a parking space at one time, and we intentionally moved the parking and moved from the idea of a lighter, quicker, cheaper response to, we're going to permanently widen the sidewalk there and make sure it's a public space that's comfortable for people to see and kind of blend that private-public area, which is, I think, is reflective in many of these vibrant downtowns, if you think of areas you like to go to. Gabriel's was another one where we had sort of temporary seating outside of that. Last year we moved to, let's make this permanent. We know this is necessary. We know this is required. So I think all that idea of people seeing people on the street is important. But it has come a time where I think we need to think about the public realm and commercial street and investing in these areas. We didn't get a great opportunity to walk up and down Commercial today. We would have pointed out things like we have great street trees in many locations. But once you move past the conference center, many of those trees are kind of at their end of life. They're starting to impact the sidewalk. We're seeing lots of lifting. There's places where the entire root balls of the trees are coming right on the sidewalks. We need to stop and think about how we're going to integrate those replacements with the work that Mr. Rose and his team are doing. I don't like to use the term downtown revitalization. I think I said that today because I think it's quite often we say, well, okay, we need to go do downtown revitalization like it's a box we check and we're done for decades. And as soon as you say we're doing it, people say, well, you just did that like 15 years ago. Why are you doing downtown revitalization? To me, it's not a revitalization. This is about making sure downtown stays fresh and vibrant. There's a reason why when you go to the mall, every 5 to 10 years, they go in and they rip out the tiles and they change everything. It's not because it's old or dated, or maybe it's dated. It's not because it's in need of repair, it's physically breaking down. It's because they understand the importance of keeping those areas fresh. And I think when you think about downtowns and our public realms in the downtown, very much the same way. The other comment I wanted to make before we turn it over to you is, so that's one area is downtown opportunities we've mentioned is public realm. The other is there's certainly key properties in the downtown that are privately owned right now. there's properties that we own that we think have development potential, but there's certainly key properties that are privately owned. And what makes them key is those are the properties when you come in through town that you see right away, and I don't have to point them out, you all know what they are. And I think the reality of our downtown and the way people move through it is right now we bring people through Terminal, and it's very much, to use a theater analogy, it's very much back of house that we bring people through. And that's, if you don't stop, if you don't turn off and come in and explore the downtown, that's the impression people have. So we have this kind of 5 to 10 minutes of opportunity as people pass through to sell ourselves and say this is mine. So there's some key sites along there. I think if we can help with the redevelopment of those sites, it will go a long way to help with the image of our downtown. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought. I am going to, before we get into discussion, maybe ask Alyssa she's been working back there trying to put together the comments that we'd asked from you at the start, and to see if there's any kind of common themes to this. So maybe if you can just walk through those for us.
So the top one that we found was the public realm of a unification of.
I'm just talking to the local government.
Oh, sorry.
You're on.
Okay. The second was Port Drive, and then the redevelopment of key sites like Dale had just mentioned, social issues, and then mobility, and some key ones were the Front Street and the walkway.
So through the chair, that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's the extent of what staff wanted to bring to the conversation. We're really hoping to hear from council, and we have another 35 minutes set aside to hopefully allow for that conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong.
I just think it's interesting when you talk about downtown revitalization, because I just happened to go for coffee with Bob Stitt, who was the inspector of charge here in the 1970s. He said since then they've been trying to fix downtown. He said millions have poured into it. So people keep thinking of it as that way. It's like it's a constant throwing money into it. So I just found that interesting that he said the most successful was the last one that Dave talked about when he really cleaned up downtown, where graffiti. Like for me, when I brought my nieces down, they wouldn't get out of the car. I was laughing. They come from Calgary because they didn't feel safe. They're 12 years old. They didn't feel safe in our downtown because we were going to go to Silly Boat, but we couldn't find parking. Just when we park here now, they wouldn't know. So I think it's really interesting. Same thing. I talked to older women. They don't like to use the public parkade because the stories, of course, circulate. People have been attacked down in the parkades. The odor sometimes with people using them, I've always believed it's better to have a person in there because people feel safer, even though it's not necessarily true. It's a psychological impact that when that gate comes down, there's somebody there that you can yell to for help. So, but those are some of the issues I hear about from people as one of the reasons why they won't come down here is they like the on-street parking, they don't like the parkade parking because they feel that's where the homeless are. And I mean, when we had the guy from the coast come and talk to us about how they had actually set encampments in their parkade. So that gets all spread around with social media. People believe it, even though it's not true sometimes.
Thank you. So we have 3 more people on the speakers list. We're an hour and a half into a 3-hour meeting. Do people want to ask questions, take a 5-minute break, and then come back? How are people feeling? Do you want to just get your questions on the table and then?
I just have a point of process.
Sure, you're 3rd on the list. Is it in response to Councillor Armstrong's? Okay, so I'm going to go to Councillor Martman first. We'll just get our questions out, and then if we decide to take a break, we'll do it quickly, and then we'll come back and have more time with staff.
If, just thinking about our priorities and creating a more vibrant downtown, one thing that comes to mind, and I'm just thinking of being cost effective, and surely we can do something, is Diana Crawl Space. I am sad every time I walk into Diana Crawl Space. I don't feel it's people friendly. I don't know if it's benches and flowers or little tables or whatever we could do, but that's my personal opinion. It's something I'd like to see improved downtown.
Thank you. So that's reflected in our top 5. We had some interesting conversation in Diana Crawl on our tour today, where we heard from staff that if to fix Diana Crawl would be a big ticket item compared to some of the smaller improvements that we could make. But that's something we should probably discuss in full, maybe with Mr. Lindsay offering his input. But if we could just get these questions out and then we'll come back and have this conversation. So Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Question or suggestion would be, Can we start with pelvic realm improvements by doing temporary stuff? Like when we were up at the Cenotaph, we close off that side exit, or could even in theory close off the road going north and only have it, going south towards commercial, and you have to go down to Bash to make it commercial, and just have it one way coming up, open up that area completely, and then put some seating around and just put barricades just for the end of the summer just to see how it flows. Or knock a lane off Front Street just to see how it goes. I think I'd be quite willing and looking towards doing that before we're spending $3 million and ripping up Front Streets with it.
Sorry, do you want to respond?
Sure.
I think, and I mentioned earlier, I think this idea of like quicker, cheaper ways to experiment with change, absolutely. So those things we did along commercial, where we were looking at converting parking spaces temporarily to public seating areas, that would be another example where you could absolutely go out, experiment with some things, and then if it's working well, then you have the opportunity to formalize it. So, and one thing that I did want to say on that, I've heard council talk about a number of initiatives that I would see falling under this kind of idea, realm of quick hits or quick fixes that we could do in the downtown. And I do want to acknowledge and recognize the support that council's given us recently in our change to our organization and bringing additional capacity on, because I really think that that's going to give us the opportunity to look at some of these areas and actually staff it and support it better than we have in the past. I don't know if Mr. Harding wants to add to that, but just this idea that we have a separate culture and events section with a new manager, I think we'll be able to look at some of those small things right away. And so I'm not here necessarily saying that everything we have to do, that I need a big budget for. I just think it's a different way of thinking about it and resourcing our downtown. So I want to acknowledge that the support the council's given us recently on that.
Would you like to comment?
Sure, if you want. Just a second. I think Mr. Lindsay's mentioned that, but the position of moving culture back to Parks and Recreation culture, but having the new cultural manager and special events. So a lot of the, as I mentioned, a lot of our special events are at the fail, a lot of other events are in the downtown. And they have and also some of our major, not the major cultural venues are in the downtown. So consolidation of that manager working with the special events coordinator and working with Port Theatre and the Art Gallery and the other cultural organizations in the downtown will help. Definitely on the communication, but I think also some of the synergies or examples of how we can improve some of these things, be it the banner program or branding of wayfinding, whatever it looks like, the improvements of some of the public realm as a priority areas of what we're to do, public art.
Thank you. Councillor Gessel.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on process. Say if we, in our discussion, are talking about specific sites, do we need to go in camera for that?
That's a great question. Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Chair, through you to Councillor Hasselbrock. I would suggest if it was talking about any purchases of privately owned properties, that would definitely be an in-camera matter, and identifying those properties in the open wouldn't be advisable. So yes, definitely if you wanted to talk about that at that point. However, I'm not sure if there's going to be opportunities in the future, Mr. Lindsay, for that conversation, or...
We certainly expected that might be an area that council may want to have some further deliberations on. And again, it really depends. If the question is, can you tell me the status of an application, we can certainly talk about that. But if it's council's and then think about some of these private properties and how we can think about them differently, then it may be necessary to step in camera.
It would be necessary.
Certainly if you're moving into the realm of talking about property acquisition, something.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to propose. We want to have this conversation, and I think we want to focus it on our top 5 because that's what we all landed on. So if I could propose a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll use, I'll keep my eye on the time because we do have one more agenda item after this, but I think we should be able to get through in 90 minutes. And if we could just really try to keep our conversation focused, and particularly on our top 5. Mr. Lindsay?
planners, we can talk all day, but we had kind of, in our minds, had this as a 2-hour session, but if there's additional time, we can allocate to it. Certainly, we're here to support our council.
I'm conscious of the fact that you've given us a lot of space to have dialogue, and I don't think we've gotten there yet. So let's take a quick break, get there, and see where that goes, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so 5 minutes.
Might be tricky.
Our 5 minutes turned into about 13 there. Well done, guys. Okay, so we have an hour and 15 minutes to get through the remainder of this, and I want to reiterate that staff really want to hear us discuss what our priorities for. On the break, I also heard that members of council would really like a conversation with staff to hear kind of what the opportunities are. I'm going to reserve the final 30 minutes of this meeting for that GPC discussion, draft governance and priorities committee agenda planning document, and hope that that's enough, because I think this is a really important conversation that we can realistically take 45 minutes to have. So going off of our top 5, I would suggest if we could just start putting ideas on the table and have staff respond, staff contribute, and we'll just we'll let it go flowy through that way, and if it's not working, we'll put some more structure on it. So I have Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Thorpe, and Councillor Gesselbrock.
When we look at public realm improvements and beautification, I think one of the top issues for me is dealing with the graffiti in those downtown areas, because it's that broken window syndrome. And I've noticed since we've gone away from doing that, it's unbelievable. I know there was a meeting between business owners and Ward Plattman. I don't know if you know Ward used to be the inspector that founded a big program in Canada on that. And that's his biggest issue, is that the broken window starts with the graffiti. So, and I mean, it's all over. So I think that's one thing we've got to look at, because when you see graffiti, it's a very negative. So I think that's a very small thing to do that would make a big difference.
Please, Mr. Lindsay.
I just had a question through the chair before we get too far down on these. This is what we think we heard this morning when you give us your list.
Right.
I guess the first question we have is, did we capture this right? After we've had the discussion today, has anything changed? So is this reflective of where council thinks? Did we capture what you're currently thinking? I guess would be my first question.
So I'm seeing some nods. I personally think the public realm improvements are what we kind of continually come back to. One Port Drive is kind of on the books. We know of reports coming to us. The redevelopment of key sites, again, that's something that's coming back to us. Social issues is ongoing. Mobility could possibly be, it will be part of the active transportation plan in those ongoing conversations. So I believe the one piece that we're missing, that we don't have a plan for or strategy around, is the public realm improvements. But I offer that up to the table. Does anyone have additional thoughts? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of nods. Okay, I have a speakers list. Councillor Thorpe. Oh, sorry, I'm going to interject, take my liberty as chair. Social procurement graffiti is often the very first ways that cities involve or incorporate social procurement. So it's just something that's percolating and that sits there for me to investigate. So Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was maybe just a clarification question, because I would like some examples of what we're talking about when we talk about public realm improvements, beautification. Could be very small things, could be much bigger things. So
That's why I
don't disagree with it, I just want to know what some examples could be.
I think the chair, generally we talk when I speak to public realm, it's really those public-private spaces between buildings and the traditional travel lanes of the public right of way. So in the downtown, our public realm is expanded to include the sidewalks, but it can and does include public plazas, our parks, all of those areas where there's opportunities for people to congregate, people to seek respite in the downtown, or for social events. Looking at our park trees, yeah, certainly the physical elements of that. Mr. Hardy's correct. Street trees, lighting, public art, all things that we can do. Benches and water fountains, or all those things we can do physical improvements in to help improve public.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does, and I'm sure we'll get into maybe more specifics by some other councillors, but I've said a number of times that people that I've talked to during and since my campaign are concerned about having a safe city and a clean, good-looking city, and I think number 1 and number 4 both relate to those basic requests or desires, so I certainly support those. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Council. I think that we are on the cusp of a tipping point for downtown in terms of it really taking a strong hold and being quite a center of activity. Just looking at the amount of development that's going in there, or potential development. And I think that it's absolutely critical that we as a council make some really quick wins and showing that we're taking downtown seriously and executing on making the public realm these spaces usable and nice. And some quick wins within the public realm and improvement and beautification, I think, are very important. And I would like to hear from staff some specifics of things that we can give you direction on, potentially even today, to pursue in those. With improving the public realm and these beautiful spaces, I think that it's very important that we do need to recognize that we are operating within a new reality of the opioid crisis and increasing homelessness, and that we need to have a very clear strategy on how we're going to operate in this new reality in terms of making sure that that force doesn't, take up the new public spaces that we may be trying to beautify and use, and how are we going to go? And I know that's going to tie in very closely with the new task force in health and housing, but it's a very integrated consideration for the development of downtown. And so I would like from Ms. LaBerge and what are some things that we are going to be doing to make sure that this issue is being looked at and a problem that we're designing around. And that may be building into the stronger advocacy piece that we need to be looking at more federal, provincial funding in how are we going to design around, have the resources to deal with that for us. Building into these quick wins and things that we need to quickly signal to the community that we're taking our downtown seriously is the redevelopment of some key sites. And I don't want to delve too deeply in here in an open meeting, but I think that we should be moving quickly and sending staff direction to move on some of these sites. And I would really like to have that discussion. Hopefully maybe today there is an opportunity to have a quick discussion in camera so that we can give staff heads up, like let's go do this. And lastly, I think if we can look at the quick wins to send the message and really be able to maybe take action on things that we can do in the short term. I really like the idea of this of an integrated mobility strategy, so that as this density is erupting in our downtown and is taking hold, we actually have a plan of how to guide that growth in a way that's going to make sense of people moving through the space, and that's connected and integrated, so that we don't end up with weird situations happening because we didn't think about it with a bit more forethought. So I like this mobility study and seeing that as a sort of a longer, more slower burn process. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gesselbach. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. I think the mobility one, I think as much as it's my top priority, if it's coming back with some potential decision points, it might be worth parking that just so we have a little bit of evidence and talking points to maybe launch off from. But so going through the list, in terms of public realm and improvements, I think there's some things that I would love to have the conversation with council and staff on, does something like Tideline Parks make sense? Can it be delivered quickly? Because it's a relatively small project and things like that. But one thing I would like to do is give the community an opportunity to implement ideas. And I'm a little biased towards this idea, but tactical urbanism, small projects that are temporary or pilot-based that can be fun and trial some of these ideas. And there's been an interesting movement to legitimize some of these projects and give the community an opportunity to do them in a meaningful way. And so how they've done that is the cities have developed a tactical urbanism policy that says this is sort of the spectrum of acceptability in which these projects can be delivered. I'd also really strongly advocate that we have some funding associated with that. So if folks can say, for example, I think it's one of the coolest projects in our city in a long time was the Urban Art Gallery. And so they had to fundraise to potentially, make that a better site than the open art wall and things like that. It would be cool if we could help facilitate that, because I don't think there's a bottomless pockets that are going to start to fund some of those projects. So I'm willing to put forward a motion that we develop a sanctioned tactical urbanism policy with associated grant stream for implementation in our downtown, because I think that we got to start somewhere and it's a focus.
Second.
No, it's too soon.
Okay, any discussion on the motion?
No.
That was the motion.
I said I'm willing to put forward.
Oh, sorry.
I'm willing to second
Okay, that
it when he
wasn't the
does put
motion,
it
okay. All right. All right. Would you like a response from staff on that, or are you just putting this out for
I'm putting it
conversation?
out there for
Is that
everybody.
actually a motion, Madam Chair?
No, he said I'm willing to make a motion, that's where I got confused. So there is no motion on the table.
session.
Yeah.
This is a great idea. We can sort out what that means.
For sure. That process-wise, though, I heard that we weren't looking for direction today, but then I'm just curious on when we'll ever have an opportunity for direction, because it seems to be a common theme where we have a lot of discussion sessions, but not a lot of direction sessions. So, process-wise, I'd be looking for guidance.
Okay, Mr. Rudolph, you can respond to that?
It's a large conversation, Madam Chair. Just the function of this table and this topic is your first day to actually have a, I don't know what you call it, buffet of information about the downtown and start to narrow it down. There's different themes. One of the main themes that I heard earlier on is we have a lot of plans, but we haven't had as much on the implementation side. So staff projected to you early on today that they feel they're in a position to act, but we'd like direction on that. How do we facilitate ourselves to get to that stage? So we're at the very beginning of unpacking this issue today. I'm hearing quick wins. There's certain themes that are coming out of this tactical urbanism. So it's sort of I get the message there. So again, we're just going around, and maybe there's a wrap to today, which would summarize the key themes of discussion, and maybe then would be the time to entertain some motions, which would be to come back in this public forum with further discussion or a report on a couple of things. It would be logical and wanted kind of direction for staff. There may be some property-related matters that would be best discussed, at least in the first kind of as a closed meeting. I'm reminded of a property official at the City of Vancouver who one time told me that the former mayor had publicly declared that the city was going to go out and purchase a number of, intended to purchase properties for SROs and that type of thing, and immediately the price tripled on these places. So anytime you declare that or give an inference around anything that's going to go on the private side, you have to be careful. And then people don't, of course, want their properties talked about that way in public realm anyway. So I just think we'll be careful on that. So I would invite you to just go around the table, share those things, and then try to sum it up as chair, and get that, and try to put in words what kind of motions might seem to be there. Come back with some ideas on the public realm, based on the input that we're hearing today. Shortlist it, you can ask actually staff for ideas as well. We can easily do that, and so on.
Okay, so you see motions emerging out of today that...
Well, I think you could give direction for us to write a report or go and prepare something for your consideration. I think going into a tactical urbanism committee or something would be jumping one step faster than I think I'm ready to understand what we're doing.
No committees, just action.
Okay.
So I'm hearing a real desire from staff and also from council to brainstorm and to use this opportunity to kind of throw ideas on the table, to hear from staff. We do have endless amounts of plans, but as you said, implementation has been an issue, whether that's resource or staff or political will, whatever. So this is an opportunity to talk about those ideas. At the end, we'll have a conversation around perhaps requesting a report come that kind of is a summary of maybe some potential public realm improvements that staff could bring to us.
More specific there, we might be able to get quite specific instead of still always being at the 50,000 feet. How do we get down without being all over the map?
Okay. I have a list.
I wasn't finished,
Okay.
but if that may jump in. The other thing is I do think we have a bunch of projects that we can do. However, I often think we tend to jump to, well, if we do this project, it's going to be X millions of dollars. Would really be sort of back on that tactical theme. Is there a way that we can implement some of these improvements that aren't necessarily just a full-out design? That sometimes I think when we talk about complete streets, we just think, okay, we got to dig up the asphalt, we got to put in trees, we got to put in proper sidewalks, when maybe just a painted line and a couple of blue lights would do. And so that's implementation, I think, can be cheaper, and there's some great examples of municipalities within Canada that have been able to do some. Hamilton, Ontario comes to mind as a place that's really been leading in that regard.
Chris Woolwich just went up.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. And I think staff did a good job, I feel, with capturing the top 5. And from what I'm hearing is that really we're anxious to get going. We're anxious to show the city that we're making some type of improvements, even if it's temporary, even if it's just beautification. And which brings me back to Diana Qual Plaza. So my personal, I would really like to see whether it's just simply picnic tables or patio furniture, or I'm not sure. I know things go missing, but I'm also thinking though of keeping our downtown clean and the weeds and the streets and everything. I heard that actually it's a responsibility of the building owners for that little space in front of where they work, that they're responsible for the cleanliness and the weeds? No, I'm talking about the sidewalks and...
Well, I can speak to that, Madam Chair. So we do have a bit of a program, and this is one thing that we could turn the notch up on. We do have a program that addresses power washing, street sweeping, and we'll even leaf blow the streets and the sidewalks before major events. But we could notch that up, and I think that would catch a lot of this.
I think the battery's dead.
Mike's over.
So you gotta talk about it.
Looks good. It didn't make a lot of difference.
Good mic drop.
So further to that, because I'm kind of thinking of, what we say in the insurance business, pride of ownership. So that if we're creating this city we're going to be vibrant and beautiful, etc. for the public, surely the businesses can also take pride and make sure that their area they're responsible for, maybe even make a contest of who does it the best or something, but suggestion.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Mayor Crowe.
If anyone likes this idea, then you can give credit to Mr. Lindsay today who mentioned fountains and Mr. Harding who mentioned a skating arena. I think this community in particular, of the many communities that I'm familiar with in the province and certainly European centres, has always been lazy around the issue of water.
Yes.
We all talk about the waterfront and somehow that's lovely, and I'm just considering the effects of climate change and how we all wanted to stop in the shade today to rest and chit-chat as we moved on. I can't think of a space necessarily downtown readily available without moving into the potential of, we'll call it number 3, the redevelopment of key sites, which would involve purchase of private property. But it just seems to me there may be a multiplicity of opportunities for fountains around the community where literally people are encouraged in the hotter summer months as they continue to wade, and in the winter if it's larger to skate. I mean, the fact is that water is cooling. The downtown is not a very pleasant place to walk in the middle of the summer, no offense, when it's 30, 35 degrees and the sun's beating down the beautiful pavement and bricks, etc. And it just strikes me using water features, and I'm not sure the cost, and maybe they're only small, but water features are very appealing. I mean, and you traveled, what do you remember about Italy? You remember fountains in every community. Well, the wine, yes, and the food too, but I just think we are lazy in that sense. We think I'm talking about the comfort of humanity. The little tootsies are tired, and so the kids can stop and play in the pool, and those downtown workers, I mean, a pleasant place to go to lunch, drop your feet in the pond. It doesn't have to be deep. We're talking, a foot. I just think that there are some creative things that we can do to beautify it. And it can be a series of small spaces. I mean, you can fit a fountain in a pretty small area of land. And we've got lots of these little chunks and nodes. I mean, imagine sitting at a restaurant downtown with the gurgling of a little fountain. And it could be First Nations art themed, it's public art, there's lots of things, you could have contests. Just one of those things that I just pull it out and I give those two credit, and if you like it, and if you don't, well, tough luck, it's mine.
Thank you. Water fountains to drink.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Chair. So I have some ideas that I'd like to do. To me, One Point Drive is kind of at the bottom of the list. Like if all we did right now was just put a whole bunch of topsoil down, plant grass on the section where Tent City was, because it actually dips down, so you can put a meter of topsoil on there, and we could just grass the whole thing. Right? Yeah, right in that area. That would be meant, because when we went down and did our walk, and they have the walkway that they paved there, and I'm thinking that looks like a desert, because it's pavement, the entire thing. And sticking little black boxes all the way around is nice with flowers in them, but that's not what people are going to remember about the Iowa Walk. They may remember that one time. If I can tell a little story like our mayor usually does. When I had a landscaping company, we would cut these huge lawns for these big apartment buildings, right? And you could do the best job, but if you forgot a little tuft, you didn't trim it properly, they didn't see the lovely job you did. They saw the tuft because it's not supposed to be there. So when I walk downtown and I see weeds growing up between the crack and the building, that's not supposed to be there. That's something I remember. I remember the sticky sidewalks from the trees that got aphids in them. I remember that place out in front of the casino that is full of weeds right on our downtown street, right? And I think all of these things people remember that because it's not supposed to be there. Nice plants are supposed to be there, and no weeds are supposed to be there. And when you're walking down Commercial Street, the trees that are uprooting the bricks aren't supposed to be there. So those things all need to be fixed. And if it's just a question of us hiring temporary for the summer, X amount of people, and putting a couple $100,000 in there to go around and just clean up our city. Like just clean up downtown. Let's get the sidewalk sweepers back there on a regular basis. Let's power wash everything every 3 weeks or whatever. Let's just spend the money making the downtown look nice, and then put up bollards, right? So, and planters and places to sit in the places that we're making, where we're cutting these things out there. So let's just go out and spend a bit of money. Like I'm not going to go down the road that you went. We do have money in our reserve. Right? We do have money in our reserves for things like this, right? And I think we should just clean the place up. Let's get that as a start, right? Let's do that as a start, and plant more flowers and stuff like that. That's my rant for this morning.
Oh,
yeah.
And winter cabbages.
So anybody taking notes?
Bill wrote a few things down.
It's all good.
Clean it up to you.
Okay, so I have Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Thorpe.
Dana Crawl Place, I don't know if people remember, but we used to have all that you described there, and we had to take it out for safety concerns, that's where the homeless were living. There was lots of crime around there. There was lots of issues, so all the benches were removed, the flowers were taken, because when we did the septet, and they can talk about it, it just wasn't good. And I had discussions with staff members, and they said people aren't coming downtown to go to the dining hall place. They're coming down to go to Mafio Sutton, or they're coming downtown to the store. So I would like to see Mafio Sutton take some priority. The plan is already there. Everything's ready to go. Just needs dollars. That's what people are coming to our town for. Our visitors are coming there. Our main people are coming. Our own people are coming here to go to Mafio Sutton Park. So for me, that is a very fast, quick win. It's going to cost a certain amount of money. But the plans are in place. They've been in place for a long time. There's just no implementation. So for me, that would be one thing I think we could really move on fast. It could be a win situation. And like I said, most people that are coming here, they're coming either downtown to go out to eat, or they're coming to Mafio Sutton Park. They're not concerned about Dana Crawl Place. We are, because we see it as a lost space, but most people don't.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm finding myself agreeing with most of the points that have been made, and I'd like to speak to several of them if I can get my thoughts in order. First of all, as Councillor Armstrong just said, after I handed in my top three, I thought, oh, I should have put Maffeo Sutton because that master plan is there, and I think it is a real draw to our downtown. So I think that to me is important. Another one that was on my list that did not make the top five was the Terminal Nickel Gateway. And I put that because I do see it as a gateway to our city. And I'm convinced we could tie it in somehow to mobility or Front Street or public realm improvements. And I'm not saying it's a quick fix, but I think it is an important aspect to people coming into our city, their first impression. And also because of that, for me, One Port Drive and that property is a priority. And it's our last remaining piece of public land that is going to add to our waterfront atmosphere. And again, we have plans about how it could be used, and I think we really need to look at those carefully, see if we still agree with them, and then decide how we can start to move ahead. We've got all the plans. We've got all the plans. And I think at this table, probably most people would agree, yeah, let's get going, let's do some stuff. And I agree with Councillor Brown's concept that we're ready for action. I think we also need to send a message to our citizens. And I think we need to send a message to our citizens that having been in office now for a year, restructured, rebuilt, we're not there yet, but we're getting to the point where we can start to move ahead on some priorities and projects. And I think it's going to be very important to send a message to our community, especially about number 4. Yes. Because so much of our conversation around social issues is, it's not our jurisdiction, we're feeling frustrated, we're feeling helpless. Well, let's determine what little things we can do and how we can do them. And yes, continue with the advocacy, but what can we do? And maybe there's not much, but if there is anything, then let's send a message that we're doing it. And I also like the idea, as somebody said, I think it was Councillor Martman, about pride of ownership. And let's engage our citizens to take responsibility for their city as well, in terms of keeping things clean and beautification and public safety, keeping an eye out on their neighbors. I think there's an opportunity there to say, we're doing something. We want you to help do that. We want you to be part of the solution. So that's a conversation I'd like to see us have. And beyond that, I think staff have done a good job just sort of summarizing our top 5 roughly. Maybe to Councillor Brown's earlier point about, taking some action, maybe staff could come back to us with some thoughts in terms of quick wins and longer term ideas on all 5 of those areas. So what do they see as a quick win for beautification? Maybe we can spend some money getting rid of graffiti or getting rid of weeds or whatever. I totally agree with that. Let's clean up where we can at probably relatively small expense. And maybe there's some longer term suggestions that they would have. And I appreciated Mr. Lindsay's comments today that Diana Krall Plaza, that is a dead hole. But the money that would take to fix that, maybe we could use to fix a lot of other smaller places instead. And that might be my preference. So I guess I'm suggesting, in terms of addressing Councillor Brown's concern, maybe staff can come back to us at our next opportunity, and I know it's going to take some time, with some ideas. We're doing some brainstorming. Staff can do some brainstorming, maybe even attach dollar values if possible to some short-term and long-term next steps. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe, that was fantastic. And I think we probably articulated what most of us, if not all of us, are feeling. So I'm taking very similar notes to Mr. Corson, but we're duplicating here, so.
You're writing a lot nicer.
No. Okay, I have Councillor Brown, and then that's the end of the speakers list. I'll weigh in after Councillor Brown.
Yeah, one item with just respect to number 4 is I do think we have a concentration of social through probably just the nature of downtowns, but also through zoning and just just the history of unfolding of how some of these things get cited, and we do have a concentration of social services in the downtown. I'm just wondering if we sort of need to develop a new strategy to make sure they are a little more distributed. Or maybe that strategy exists. I just don't know what it is, and I do know that the folks that I hear the most about the concentration of social services all happen to be downtown. I never hear about the North End or the far South End. They do have issues, and those do emerge from time to time, but it's never the same level as pretty much all the social services and all the things that go along with that, both positive and negative, are downtown. So I just don't know if when we're talking about downtown, and I think Councillor Thorpe nailed some pretty good points there, but on the things that we can control, do we need a strategy to sort of maybe alleviate that issue over the longer term?
Thank you. Councillor Gasabon.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I think just to reiterate that point around a strategy around our social services and a strategy around just accepting this new context that we're in with homelessness and addiction, while we still want to redevelop our downtown, is, I think, very, very critical. And adding on to that, and a point that Councillor Bonner made, is that some things can be interim solutions while we wait for larger development, but that will make things look nice. And I think as you're driving into downtown, that big spot where Tent City was, like, man, if that was green grass, that would look so much nicer, and it would give a completely different feel to that entire area. And I'm not sure how expensive that would be. However, because there's this looming issue about potential tent city and this homelessness and it being used by folks that, need somewhere to hang out, we're not able to go and engage in those more maybe cheaper beautification projects because we actually, in reality, need a big fence around it so that it doesn't end up how it was before. Because I think that patch and then the patch that we walk by with the planters is another going to be a large open space. And so being able to move forward, we have to move forward with this strategy around dealing with these considerations so that we can make these quick fixes to just make things look better. And so I think we need some consideration to work through that.
Mayor Crowe.
I want to respond briefly to you, Chair, to Councillor Armstrong around the changes appreciated by the girls sometime. And I don't mean this in a horribly negative way, but that will be a defeatist strategy overall if that's the way we're going to approach this. The fact is that was then. We have a lot more people living downtown now, and to come back to the points made earlier around a busy intersection, the only way it's going to happen is if there are places for people to sit and congregate and admire and relax and admire the beauties of downtown. So I'm in favor of putting a lot more. Eventually, those who may be disturbing or whose appearance may be disturbing to people will hopefully start to diminish over time, but we can't take it in that approach. But I want to come back to this whole concept of the social issues and concentration. And I'm looking at Mr. Harding and Mr. Lindsay, who've been around a while, great deference, gentlemen. Wasn't that the subject of a policy or a paper or a discussion at council many, many years ago in this community, that was going to be avoided, the concentration of so-called social services in the downtown core? Correct me if I'm wrong, but Councillor Markman, who's likewise been around a while, is not ingeniously away. And I think that was pretty clearly decided or approved or discussed way back then, long before I was involved in anything of that nature. But
certainly, batteries, no batteries?
I don't have that size of battery.
So certainly the discussion about the dispersion of
Social service supports.
dispersal. This idea of distributing. supportive housing around the community is something that came up when the city last did the housing. So I mean, the idea that, yeah, we would have one project downtown, but it was very, the intent was there that not all housing would be downtown. That's why we ended up with this, as Mr. LeBarish mentioned earlier, the one out in Uplands, and then followed by one at the hospital, and at that time it was also contemplated that the projects on Bowen Road, just over the bridge, would also be the fourth site. So this idea that they would be distributed out. But that was very specific about the housing. Doing the same for support of services that we don't necessarily control is a little bit more difficult. And I think there's a number of reasons they end up in downtown. So that, it's not unique to that. It's the fact that, historically that's where the need's been, but also many things as simple as that's where the rent's the cheapest. And a lot of these nonprofit groups tend to congregate around these places. So,
That's number 2.
Okay, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Another idea, just throw it out there, is when I was looking at Diane Croft Plaza, and when I was looking at the new waterfront, the walkway that we're working on, it occurred to me, I said, we could use a coffee shop here, just a little one. If anyone's been down to Mill Bay, and you hop down in one of the little parking lots, there's a little tiny coffee shop. It's not even as big as this table. You just walk up, they give you some coffee, you walk away, you do your thing, right? So could we, as a city, put out an RFP for someone to set up a coffee shop in that area where there's nothing except pavement and planters now, and just pay them to have a coffee shop there? And so, I mean, it's obviously probably not going to be a money-making deal for them. So it's an RFP that the city pays for to have that service there, just like we pay to have other services there. And we could put one in Diane Croft Plaza if we wanted to. So I'm just thinking, can we do that sort of thing?
Food trucks.
They pay us.
Food trucks.
Food trucks.
Right now they can't, we just changed it. They weren't allowed there before.
Food trucks.
Go right on that asphalt.
We're not innovative at all.
Okay.
You can get a whole bunch of people to jump on that.
Mr. Rudolph, do you have something to add?
Just again, it's an idea.
Yeah.
How do you have business
Absolutely.
investment? I mean, that's one area that you really have, council really has talked a lot about is what tools do we have to incent the business community itself to invest? No BIA anymore.
No.
We want to encourage investment. What can we do in addition to all the great things we're talking about? Leadership would be there to ask a whole collection of private property owners to invest as well. What actions could we do to stimulate that conversation? We're not the only ones, stakeholder in the game. But that opens, that conversation about private businesses in the downtown is a rather important piece of this conversation. We're obviously, we talk all about the public around here, but we haven't talked about the other stakeholders and how they can come to the party and maybe share in this opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, we have 4 people on the list and approximately 8 minutes until we need to move on to our next agenda item. So if folks are comfortable, let's stick with our 4 unless there's something pressing that emerges, and then move on to the next agenda item. So Councillor Gesselot.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points. First one about BIA. I think that the business community is in the process of organizing for a downtown business improvement association, and hopefully that will be executed. The society that needs to make the application to us by the end of the summer, so that we do have a group that we can work with, main connections with business community. Second is clarity on Diana Krall Plaza. I think that there is the possibility to make it a little bit more hospitable, bring in a planter of some trees in there and maybe a little fountain, but it comes back to this question that I keep bringing up, is that we do that and then the folks that are going to be primarily hanging out there are we may not want to be attracting loitering or that way. And I think we need to make a decision as council or a policy around what are we trying to do? Is that putting the cart before the horse, just making that more beautiful because there's just not the population density and the usage downtown for the type of activity that we're trying to promote? Or we just have to get used to the fact that if we put that stuff in, yeah, there's going to be all different types of folks that are going to be using it. And we just need to have added resources in case it's being used in a way that's inappropriate to help folks move along. But I think we're caught in this tension of, okay, if we make spaces nicer and more usable, the folks right now that are available to utilize it may not be the type of activity that we're trying to attract. And I do feel that we're kind of caught still in a spot where it's difficult to make movement on making these spaces that could easily be improved with very cheap, simple fixes to attract folks. And I don't really know if there's an answer immediately on that, but yeah.
Great point. And I just want to apologize for my laughter. I'm picking up some bad habits from Councillor Thorpe when he trusted me. So I have Councillor Armstrong here next.
Again, I just want to echo Ian's points. I think we do need to look at number 1 Fort Drive because it is a big goal. I don't think it necessarily has to be the city that even develops it. It can go up to a developer. I mean, those are issues that we need to talk about. I think it's really important that we move on that because that's a key piece. When we talk about, people, that's your first impression. The majority of tourists do not come through downtown Nanaimo. Hate to break to you, they take the Parkway. And their impression is beautiful because they see the beautiful sea or ocean. Most people coming through downtown Nanaimo are South Nanaimo residents, Cedar residents. It's not tourists. And I think that's backed up by studies. So I think when we're talking about what's their tourists, it's not the tourists, it's our people we're trying to fix it up for. Most of the tourists don't want to come through downtown because of the lights. They're in a hurry to get where they're going, which is usually Parksville, Tofino, Ucluelet. So I think that's something we got to think about, that it's not for tourists that we're doing this, it's for the citizens. And my last point is, I hear from a lot of people, and I know we're talking about downtown, but there's a lot of people upset with our emphasis on downtown because other parts of our community are being forgotten about, such as up by the Terminal Park area where we dispersed a lot of people and crime went up immensely. You can go take a look at what's going on at Country Club now where everybody's got their own security guards and stuff. So we have to be really cognizant of what we're prepared to do downtown. We better be prepared to do for the rest of the city. Because we're elected to represent the whole city, not just one area. And I appreciate Mr. Rudolph's comments that we need to start getting business involved because they haven't been involved in this and the city keeps paying for stuff. Whereas we certainly aren't doing that for Cadillac Fairview or those other companies whose walls are sitting empty, who are our bigger taxpayers. Well, just something to think about when we're moving ahead with some of this stuff. I do agree we need to fix downtown, but I do hear that a lot from a lot of people.
Thank you. Good points. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I just quickly looked up the Hamilton, Ontario thing, and it was a kind of neat little campaign that they're still doing. They call it just cool little things, right? So it's just small changes that can hopefully have impacts. And some of them fail, right? Some of them aren't successful. So I think that's just the reality when you try those things. But if you make small bets, the small fails don't matter. Whereas if you make a big bet like Diana Crawl Plaza and it fails, well, we're still trying to fix it. So. And then the other, I agree, Councillor Armstrong, we do need to address 1 Port Drive in some fashion, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to add a few small points and then we'll move on. Firstly, I want to acknowledge what Councillor Gesselbrock was saying around this tension between fixing the social issues we have and beautifying our streets and this kind of this discomfort we have with what if we put basketball courts and grass down on that beautiful land and it's another tent city. Like, I think these are things that we're going to have to wrestle with, but I would hate to see us stall in moving forward for fear of something bad happening. So Mr. Corson, the only thing I don't see on your list that I believe was discussed was food trucks.
All right.
And I'm going to add my own kind of public realm improvements, beautification pieces center around public art, the urban canopy, so creating more green spaces, more trees, and again, not massive investments, just like Councillor Brown said, maybe the Tideline Park is a good place to start. I agree with almost everything that's been said. I also think that with our influx of residences being built downtown, this is going to improve the situation as we go. More people living downtown, I think, it's going to drive this beautification process. So I see that I feel like we're at the beginning of something, and it's going to start to evolve and roll naturally. Pride of ownership is something I feel really, really strongly about, and I also think that extends into social issues. I happen to live in a neighborhood where the street is an extra living room for all of the neighbors, and at any 5 o'clock you can drive down my street and there's generally kids and people out, and that's how we look out for each other. And I would like to see the city, maybe through the Health and Housing Task Force, begin to shift the narrative around, or work with the narrative around, this is a policing issue, this is a health issue. I think this is a community issue. And if we can all shift how we begin to think about it and look out for each other, that might help shift it. And I'm going off on a tangent here, but Mr. Corson, you've captured everything that I've written down. It's big. I'm not going to try to summarize, but I would like to go back to Councillor Thorpe's recommendation that if, I don't know if it requires a motion, but based on the conversation we've had and staff's kind of hearing our brainstorming, could we have a report back to say we have these amazing plans, here's some quick wins under each, and associate them with the top 5 pieces? Is that a reasonable ask coming from this discussion?
Yes. I'll answer that because firstly, I will produce a set of minutes and documents as a result of this meeting, but if you boil those down to key points, and then there's short wins, short term within budget, short term maybe extra budget, medium term, we could probably sort through that somewhat quickly, but to do a thorough job would take a bit of time. But I think in terms of summer's moving on, we probably talk about it tomorrow and see what we can get back to in a very short fashion with. And we don't really need a motion on that unless you have particularly strong views on specific issues. Get back to you and just kind of bring it back. And you've said this to us before, you're looking for us to provide you with some of the solutions or ideas as well. So this is what these people do every day. They think, read this every day. So I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver here, but I'd like to get what you're saying, and we'll come back to you as quickly as possible with some I like the way it was described, the top 5 with 5 items under each of those that might be quick actions that we can take without a great budgetary expense.
Thank you, and I think the budget is going to be a key piece because that's going to help us decide what we can do and what we can maybe do 2 years down the road.
Mr. Sims talked about an enhanced level of street sweeping, power washing, that type of thing. Well, we can sort of clarify that a little bit to see if that's something we can redeploy or without causing resources being taken away from somewhere else. And just back to this is a seminar about the downtown, so we aren't talking about the entire city, so that's why we're so focused on it today. Not to say that we're taking away from elsewhere, but it is a pivot point for us. And this is our first time in almost a year where we've spent an afternoon talking about it, so it's important to get all those ideas on the table.
And I also think, if I may, I believe it's important to understand from Mr. Lindsay that revitalization isn't a point in time, it's a process, and these are conversations we probably have to continually have, because to hear 15 years ago that half of the storefronts were empty and we're talking about the chaos that downtown is in right now, it sounds like we've actually come a long way in acknowledging our successes and how to grow them. I'm going to give Councillor Gesselbrock last word on this, and then we'll move on. Mr. Harding, I have 2 hands over there.
I just want to mention one thing with the love that the council wants to do. I think it's also important that we show you what we are doing and sense the level of service. So historically, downtown Nanaimo has received a much higher level, particularly horticultural services, hanging basket programs, hiring horticulture. So there is a lot of different levels of street cleaning. So it already has a much higher level. Actually, council needs to also know that those are higher level services have happened and continue to happen. And so, I think we should also include that in this report. Yes. So you see that.
And that's important information. Yeah, Mr. Sims?
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'd like to also maybe direct council's attention to the work that Maddie's done. And just it's kind of, it's been vibrantly growing as we've been deliberating. And she's capturing a lot. So this forms part of the record, really, in our minds.
Maybe I'll jump ahead of Councillor Gesselbrock and just say that personally, I think this is what we've been creating as far as how a GPC goes and kind of rolling up our sleeves and getting into the issues. So thank you so much to all of staff. This has been a fantastic session from my perspective. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. Just for some clarity on the motion, is this sufficient for staff to move forward on items to keep this process rolling? Is that basically, my understanding, that I don't know if we're doing a motion or not. It's not a motion, but to come back with a report on these top 5 priorities that we've identified and quick wins and long-term actions with dollars on them, so that we can then sort of refine. That would have been successful?
Yes.
Great. So closing the downtown portion of this, again, thank you. This is wonderful. This is an amazing record. These are really interesting boards for us to kind of have conversation around. But we do have one item remaining, and that's agenda planning. And it doesn't have anyone assigned to it.
I can speak to it, and Ms. Curry can speak to it.
Okay.
I think, can I just intro this and then turn over to Ms. Curry? So there's really 2 parts to this, broadly speaking. One is to explain to you what our calendar says, and a published calendar says in terms of GPC meetings for the balance of the year, which is shockingly few if you look at the numbers. So in order to accommodate the possibility of more of these meetings, we are going to add to that calendar. If you look at the screen, that's one thing. And then there's beyond the proposed additional date of July 29th, which is subject to council's availability. After that, we don't actually have any program topics in the queue for on any level for council for GPCs for the fall, other than budget and all those types of things. So it's really, this is an ongoing recurring list that we've had back at the staff level, nothing that council's discussed. And so the idea is to get some feedback on primary scheduling, primary topics that you would like to see some things on, and we could develop what some of the city call matrix of topics for the balance of the year and get a schedule. And this is not a dealing with the subject of agendas committee. So there's a lot of things that could be on the table as part of this conversation, but for clarity purposes, that's what we did. We brought in the calendar, which is a reality check, and secondly, then how do you want to use this time in what order of priority, if that's possible. So I'd ask the availability for the 29th, because I think some councillors had planned to be away at that time. So that might be one of our immediate challenges.
I'm here.
So Chair, if I could just take over. So thank you, Mr. Rudolph. That explains a lot of it. So there's 2 pages on your agenda, and on your agenda actual, an item on your agenda called agenda planning. So staff have been working for months now, since your term basically, and since the motion regarding governance and priorities committees, to bring you topics at first that were educational, kind of orientating you into your roles, picking up on items that you had discussed and felt you needed or wanted more information on, and bringing those types of items to the governance and priorities committee. And then, as Mr. Rudolph mentioned, I think it was a couple months ago now, that we're kind of naturally rolling into round 2 of these governance and priorities committees. And I think today you saw a really wonderful example that's going to be hard to beat of what they could be. And now that you've had all the education and information, now it's the implementation. So round 2 of everything, not everything, but a lot of what has been to a governance and priorities committee, and now coming back to have these brainstorming sessions now that you know all the information. Now it's rolling up your sleeves and having these types of discussions like you did today. So hearing a lot of your conversations and a lot of staff input, the list that's on the next page of the agenda is based on a lot of staff ideas, so a lot of things staff would like to bring to you to let you know about and have discussion with you about, but some of them do come from, it's on the next page. Some of them do come from things we've heard from council that are important to you, like the OCP and or facilities or revenues, such as bylaw revenues or sponsorship. So we have grayed out the topics of the actual governance and priorities committees that we've already had with you. And this doesn't include before governance and priorities, the special COW meetings that we were having this type of format as well. But some of the topics that we've already gone over with you, and then today's item with the date beside it, potential for the 29th, and then a list of other items that, like I said, are some staff ideas that we'd like to bring to you and some that council's mentioned. But having this as a line item on your governance and priorities committee agenda could help facilitate you adding things that you would like to see from staff to this list, changing and shuffling the date of when you would like to see them, and having that discussion regularly at your governance and priorities as an agenda planning process. So having your input, what do you want to hear from us? So when we did look over our list the other day, or about 2 weeks ago amongst staff here, it was, okay, but what does council want to hear about? So we started to try to think of what have we heard from you that you want to hear? So we tried to put some of those items in the list, but this would be your opportunity as a committee, all of you, to provide your ideas for what you would want to see at these governance and priorities committees and add those to the list. And then based on what staff are available to bring to you in a timely fashion. So say you wanted something completely different on the 29th, we might not have it ready right now. And we would say to you, no, we can't get that to you by the 29th, but work with you on the dates. But then going back to the dates, if you don't count today, because it's over, and you don't count the 29th, basically until the dissolving of the committee of the whole, there was really only 3 more meetings left this year for governance and priorities committee based on the committee of the whole schedule. And that is October 28th would be the next one if you went by the committee of the whole schedule, and then November 25th and December 9th. So there was 3 more meeting dates. So the half green that you see on your calendar are potential dates, additional dates. So we've added in the 29th, because actually we had decided we would have one, that's why it's not half. So the 29th would be an additional date. August 26th could be an additional date. September 9th, October 7th, as well as the 28th, November 4th, as well as the already scheduled 25th, and December 9th. So there is availability to add some additional dates, just with the way the calendar has worked for Committee of the Wholes this year. It doesn't leave very many options for Governance and Priorities Committee. And then after the dissolving of the COW in the procedure bylaw, if that happens, then we would come back with a key date calendar based on these dates if council was willing. And even if it's in a key date calendar, it can still be adjusted based on council wanting to cancel or add additional meetings. It can still be adjusted, but at least we have a baseline of meetings. And so now I'll just turn it over to you if you have discussion or questions about that.
If I could just take a second to summarize, because that was a lot. What I'm hearing, no, it's great. I'm hearing a request for our input on adding extra days to have GPC meetings, and those are indicated on the screen in the half green.
Yeah.
The second ask is this list that has primarily been driven by staff. Is that an accurate representation of the topics we want to see at the GPC? And third, how are people feeling about the mechanism by which we identify GPC topics? Ms. Gurry, I can't remember if you just mentioned this, but in our agendas meeting this morning, on the GPC agenda itself, there can be an item added where every GPC we offer, this is what I'd like to discuss, in the future at some point, high priority, etc. So does that work, or do we want another mechanism?
So Chair, that is what staff came up with as a solution, to have it as a standing item on your Governance and Priorities Committee agenda. So every agenda would have agenda planning as an item. It would have this list brought back to it every governance and priorities committee for adjustments. So if something else is emerging out there that you want to talk about before an item you already have planned, or something that's not even on your list has come up and you would like to now discuss it, we could add it to the list, we could try to rearrange the schedule. This is based on resourcing and available to get you back that information when you want it. We'll always do our best. And also we would ask that it stay in the framework of our work plans, which is based on your strategic plan. So ideas from left field, we would ask that you not try to incorporate into this list and move forward. That's what
Okay.
I think I've pretty much, I don't think I've missed anything, Mr. Rudolph. Do you have anything?
I would just say, that in order to do this level of planning, we can't do that in 2 weeks.
No.
So if we had a recurring thing, it would be little things, not big
Yes.
things. So this, if we could get anchor dates for big topics, that's what we've been trying to do, and there's always the extra items that get added to committees. But I was thinking, in addition to what Ms. Curry has indicated, sort of those big topics where we need to spend the time and get properly prepared, where it's an interdepartmental issue or that type of thing. And we're also, I think you could also put the Finance and Audit Committee as a candidate for some of these on the financial side. So take a little bit of the pressure off of us on these Mondays for finance-related issues. For example, on Wednesday, we're doing a bit of that with our workshop. That's a great place for financial-related things. So we have that in addition to this. So, yeah, so we're just coming back to you and saying it's kind of, obviously you have to have a session somewhere on OCP, for example. I think you should have it here first and then go to council. That way you can get your head completely around the issue, the process, the committee, the whole 9 yards. So that's, to me, a big topic. And some of the other plans, how they relate to that. So that's coming in the not too distant future, I hope. And, yeah, we're throwing a lot at you today, and hopefully we'll get some sense of how you'd like to proceed, or if you just allow us to guide that piece, or if there's another mechanism to develop agendas for the GPC, be pleased to hear it.
Okay, I've got Councillor Geselbrecht in line, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, were you first? My apologies.
That's all right.
Don't go. Yeah, through you. So 2 comments, one on content for these GPCs, and then another one on sort of looking at how we can build out our process around agendas and topics and scheduling. The first on content, in terms of topics, for me, the OCP Parks Planning Active Transportation Plan, GPC, I think would be a really important one. One that I didn't see, and I'm not sure around the timing of it, is one on just our overall addiction strategy. I think that we're coming into summer. I think there's, I feel additional pressure on having sort of a shared strategy and communication around what we are doing in terms of managing this issue. And I know that the Housing and Health Committee is meeting Wednesday, and that this is going to come out of that, but I do feel that there is a bit of a void in how we are communicating to the public on where we're at with this and what we're doing. And I do feel that some discussion around that needs to happen. Potentially after, we've met a couple times, but I do feel that if we don't, the issue is going to be leading us, and we're not going to be able to proactively be ahead of it in terms of how we're communicating. So in terms of process around this, I really like the idea of having a section in each governance and priorities committee meeting where council can come forward with topics and ideas that they would like discussed and put forward to that. I came today prepared to put a motion forward on formalizing an agendas committee that would take requests of new topics and then be able, in conversation with the CAO and Sheila around where staff is at, around timing of when topics would be happening, and also looking at the agendas of where it's appropriate for different items to show up depending on their size, be it at a regular council meeting, GPC, or finance and audit, so that there can be some communication about back to council when items would be happening, communication more regularly back to council when items will be showing up on agendas and where, and to have some input on potentially, the location where they'll be showing up. So I don't know, I'll maybe put that forward later on for discussion after we've heard from the rest of council. And then in terms of more dates for a GPC meetings, I'm all, if necessary, depending on what agendas committee comes up with, to have more dates for GPC meetings throughout the year. I think that would be, if it's necessary, to have them for sure.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a lot in there, and I'm just gonna try to give staff some clear direction on at least the date portion, so you can go away, because this, I imagine,
Can
will be
we
a
wait
longer
till our vote
conversation.
tonight, because what if it doesn't pass? I'm gonna look against it, so that's why.
I can speak to that. So the Governance and Priorities Committee is already a thing, like, so it's already been formalized by council, and so that's done. So whether or not the dissolving of the Committee of the Whole happens in the procedure bylaw adoption, which is near the end of August at the earliest, or September, the GPCs are still moving forward. So the dates for the Governance and Priorities Committee can be voted on today or decided today.
So with the additional dates, so in order to give staff a heads up to be able to plan appropriately to bring us information, we should be able to right now say yay or nay, where we agree with all
Madam
dates.
Chair, it'd be good if we could get you to agree to the fact that we are proposing these new scheduled dates. If it comes to pass that we don't have something for you, or you decided not to meet, you could always cancel those meetings. But for agenda planning, just to have those dates protected would be good. These are additional times, so that was what we're suggesting. Otherwise, we're in a fairly limited number of times when we will actually have scheduled GPCs. So you could always schedule special ones if you want through it. So this is sort of trying to pre-plan those extra dates in advance, and then the topics after that we spoke with.
Okay. Councillor Thorpe, what was your question in response to Mr. Rudolph's? Is this about dates?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
then I'm
it is.
gonna, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I would support the dates on the understanding through the chair to Mr. Rudolph that the staff felt the topic was necessary and staff could be adequately prepared to give us a fulsome discussion, as you did today, which was wonderful. I think we run the risk of burning out staff if we try and hold them too often. And they're not fulsome. And I think, quite frankly, burn out council too. So I think we're all willing to meet and get the work done. So I'm confident that if staff feels that they have the resources and the meeting is necessary, then we can plug those extra dates in. And if it turns out that we're not ready or we need to delay it, then we can do that. And while I have the floor, I'll also say I like the list of topics. I think they're all important, and I think this process sounds workable to me.
Okay, thank you. So given our time limitations, I feel like the clearest direction we could give the staff today is to say yes or no to the dates, so preparations can be made.
Yes, and I just would add, Madam Chair, that regardless of the outcome of tonight's discussion on Committee of the Whole and Procedure Bylaw, which this plan would essentially provide for a meeting pretty well every Monday, except for the holiday Mondays. So every second week is council, and the ensuing weeks would be GPC or GPC and Committee of the Whole, wherever you end up with tonight. So we're anticipating that. And it might be, so we're not saying meet for the sake of meeting, but this is just protecting the dates in case. And then the second part of this is get some of those topics planned. So it gives us actually staff like to have those opportunities to bring set dates and work towards them. It's helpful for us for planning purposes.
so we're recommending this actually.
Okay, so on the topic of dates and holding these, not
Yeah.
necessarily using them, but
Right.
holding them in our calendars to say if a GPC item is identified and we agree upon that, we're gonna meet on those days. Do I hear any massive dissent? Okay, so we're comfortable with going ahead with the dates. Now, I have a speakers list, likely on the topics. Councillor Armstrong?
I think we should be having staff make the talks because they know what we're missing better than we do right now. I think that can change after we get more comfortable. Give us another year when people are really getting that because we don't know what we're missing if we haven't learned it yet. So I think it's really important that we look at what staff sees is important from their perspective first. We get those done and then I think we'll be in a position this time next year to set our own topics. And then I'll discuss the rest of it tonight's.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you. I disagree entirely. I think that the topics should be driven entirely by council. Because it's my understanding that the GPC was a place that we would sit down, no holds barred, and we could thrash out policy and make decisions that would then go to council to get ratified. Like, in all honesty, and no offense to staff or anything, but records management and privacy, is that an issue?
It's huge.
No, I know it's huge, I understand it. Is it broken? Do we need to change something? If we don't, let's just let it carry on. I know we had some issues last term, but there's a whole bunch of these things here, like our grants, right? And I'm on one who's always been over grants, but are they broken? Do we have to change something drastically? I don't think so. So we could be, with all honesty, like we could have these things weekly, and I still, after 4 years, would not have known how all the things that are going on in the city, right? I wouldn't mind having a GPC that talks specifically about our policies on stream cleanup, waterfront restoration, and urban tree things. Completely, none of these topics are in there, and I don't think really staff would have a whole bunch of bringing forward on that, right? It's just us sitting down and says, what do we want to do about cleaning up all of our streams? What do we want to do about restoration of our waterfront areas and putting in the beaches? And what do we want to do about tree canopy? And we'll just sit down and hash out a bunch of policy. And to me, that's what I see the GPC is. So I want, which is why I'll be supporting or looking to have us in our agendas committee figure out the topics that we want to do it and the priority that we want them into.
Okay, two opposing views. Thank you both. Councillor Brown?
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what Councillor Thorpe said, and I also agree with a lot of what Councillor Bonner said. In terms of some of these topics, they seem overly operational, and my impression of the governance priorities committees was two things: policy development, thrashing it out, as you say, and also emerging priorities. So things that are coming quickly that are going to need some discussion. And I'll just, two things that I think one more important one is where, and I'll just highlight it because I think it's an emerging priority, is sort of, and I think everyone can imagine on the issue, but what is going to be our advocacy policy on a hot topic around housing and with the province and the federal government? That's a priority for a variety of reasons that I imagine would be elevated to something like a GPC where we discuss it out. The reason why I think we don't necessarily get that, or we might be overly reliant on notice of motions, not that we should never use them, but maybe, is because we currently have no mechanism for a council person to say, I want to talk about this item, and maybe it doesn't get talked about, but I think there needs to be a process, and I think that process, to Councillor Armstrong's point, should also be one for staff. And I could imagine, I don't know exactly what you'll be proposing, but an agendas committee that obviously the mayor and CAO and possibly some others to fill it out, but not have a quorum or by any means, is there's a policy in place where a particular general manager can say, hey, I got this emerging issue, or hey, I think this needs to come in front of council, or a council member could propose an issue that doesn't necessarily get talked about, but there's a mechanism in place where it can be selected by folks on this agendas committee, as I understand is what Mr. Cupp put forward to have that selection take place. I think not having that produces confusion. It produces advancing things through notice of motions, which can be, I think, a useful tool, but it also can be extremely messy and not have the best decisions made. So I do think some thought needs to be put in, and I really actually deem this as an important tool of governance. One other, I have no problems with the date, but I actually don't think we've really talked about public engagement at the level of which was, I think, intended or anticipated, and part of that is I also think communications and how we deliver things to the public. The only reason I say that is because if we get, in year two of our term, well, it's, at that point, we probably wanted to have that discussion.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left. We have Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Gasserbach, and a potential motion.
Just to go to Councillor Bonner's part, that's the reason why I think staff should be bringing that forward, because when you talk about what we want to do this with tree canopy stuff, if it's already in place, then why are we having this meeting? Then we go to staff and say, well, we can't do that because legally you can't, or this you can't. That's why I think it's important that staff talks to us first, we find out what our existing policies are, and then rehash them. Because, somebody sent us that island bylaw thing. We've got an island bylaw, and it's just as good, if not better, than other places. And people are replying, oh, I never knew we had one, or well, we do. It's the same thing with the street. We have all these bylaws in place. We actually have the better panhandling bylaw in place in Salmon Arm and those places do. But unless you know they're there from staff, you don't know. So that's why I think it's important to hear from staff that they think it's important for us to know. Then if we don't like what we're hearing from staff, because we think we disagree that, well, you know what, we want more street cleaning, okay, then fine, so which budget item are we going to pull so we can get more street cleaning? So that's how I look at it. Staff knows where our weaknesses are better than we do, in my humble opinion. They want to educate us on it, and then if we don't like what we're hearing from staff, we can say, well, that's fine, Mr. Sims, but you know what? I want those streets cleaned once a week, and I'm willing to pull this to pay for it. That's where I see the GPC coming in for that type of conversation. And my other last concern is the fact there is absolutely no public engagement on this, and everything that's on our CAL meeting is now going to go to a council meeting, which is going to make our council meetings very long. Because I would like to see the public be more engaged. I always thought the GPC was for the public more to sit down and have a big, frank, open discussion with the public. Talking with Mr. Cuff, that's what he thought too. So that's where my concern comes in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This has been something just on process where I think the communication between staff and council so that we can get items onto agendas and have the discussion that's necessary and be able to sequence and time things in a little bit more fluid manner, an effective manner. I think that there has been a gap with not having a formalized agendas committee. And so I would like to put a motion forward, and I do recognize that we're right at 4 o'clock, but maybe I'll just put it on the floor and get feedback. But I'd like to move that staff prepare terms of reference for an agendas committee for discussion at the next GPC meeting. And the agendas committee would review and prioritize GPC and regular council agenda items.
Would you like to speak to it?
Over here first.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Curran.
Thank you, Chair. I can let Councilor Gasserbach speak to it. I just wanted to bring to Council's attention once again. I think I've said it before, but when it comes to council agendas, there's not that much wiggle room on what can be on the actual council agenda because bylaws have to go at a certain time, development permits, rezonings, etc. So normally those are based on the community charter elements, and there's not topic items that aren't legislated or regulated are normally what drives the council agendas.
100%. I think that there are, Chair, there are items, for example, the timing of items, for example, the discussion on the safe injection site, when those things would appear. There are items I think that there is wiggle room on, and that's why I included the regular council meetings. But basically, for some background, the agendas committee would be comprised of the city clerk, CAO, mayor, acting mayor, and the next in rotation for acting mayor. And then the committee can invite staff member or council member to provide background discussion on emerging issues that have been requested for consideration. I think to provide a mechanism for emerging issues to be considered by the agendas committee, I like the idea and presented here tonight, but that there will be a recurring item on the GPC agenda where these topics can be introduced by a council or staff member and submitted for consideration to the agendas committee. And then the agendas committee would review a list of emerging topics and prioritize appearance of topics on the GPC, finance and audit, and council meeting agendas.
where appropriate. And those are sort of the rough thoughts of the particulars of this agendas committee, and I think that it would take out a bit of confusion of when items should be put forward, and also allow council to be a little bit more in tune of the timing of items, and a bit more fluid communication between staff and council, keep everybody on the same page and flow. So that's why I think this is important.
Thank you. Does anyone have any discussion? Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, as I said earlier this morning, I understand and I agree that there's been some confusion, some frustration among council about how to get topics on the table and introduce ideas, and I understand that. I'm not sure this is the best way to go. It sounds interesting. I guess I'd be, and I don't, I'll put him on the spot. I'm curious with Mr. Rudolph's experience in other jurisdictions and models. Is this something that you've seen before? I know Mr. Cuff suggested it, but he suggested things that we didn't agree with, so we're not married to him. But is this reasonable, or do you have an alternate suggestion? Would you be willing to share any thoughts?
Sure.
Through the chair.
Thank you. No, I don't have any direct experience with an agendas committee, and I haven't seen it implemented. It doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Obviously, Mr. Cupp has seen it in places. So, there's a lot of questions around this that would go with it. I mean, at this stage, we're asking all of council to input on topics, but this doesn't deal with the notices of motion, and I'm not sure how notices of motion, those very specific topics would come into an agendas committee process. I don't know how we would do that, and so there's lots of things about approving of delegations at committees or councils, all that type of thing. So is it all of council in the tent, or is it just some of council in the tent? That's a common question with councils. Do you all want to be part of that, or is it go away and give us recommendations kind of thing, which is delegating it to a subgroup and come back? So I don't know if I have a clear answer on this. I'm not sure I have if council wishes us to pursue this concept of an agendas committee and come back and give you an outline of how that might work, I think that's easy for us to do. I'm not sure it would flush out all the questions. So I know that was one of the unleft pieces of the discussion that we had right from the beginning here in terms of committees and all that kind of thing. So it's valid. It's also valid if there is a sense of differences of opinion, we'll say, instead of frustration about how to get information and new ideas or ideas period onto the table. That's not a new item, and I think it's a valid comment if there's those sentiments, and so we're still working our way through that. So.
Ms. Curry has a comment.
Thank you, Chair. And just some other items that would probably be involved in the report back, along with the terms of reference, is logistics. So internally, we have report deadlines that are 13 days before the meeting date. So 13 days before the Monday meeting date is when staff have reports for agendas in to legislative services. So it would be well in advance for emerging issues or item that council wants at the next agenda. That throws kinks into our internal report processes too. So those items will be coming forward in the report.
So we have a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Sorry, Councillor Brown, did you hand up?
Yeah, I think there's no harm in exploring a process that might make our governance ultimately better. Maybe we probably are in uncharted territory here. We might get a report back and say, hey, the negatives outweigh the pros here, what we were trying to do. But I think we've embarked on a path based on a recommendation by Mr. Cuff. We owe it to flush out and see if we can introduce a new type of governance model through our calling the GPC and the process and its relation with council that can really create maybe something that we can't point to in other places, but fundamentally improves how council makes decisions. So I support wholeheartedly support exploring that to sort of flush out those details so we can get a clear process, so that we're all working on the same page, have the same expectations, and when we come into a particular type of meeting, what the level of discourse is and the anticipated outcomes are. So I think that's
Quick question, if I may. Can I have the motion read back to me, please?
So the motion is, I move that the staff prepare terms of reference for an agendas committee for discussion at the next GPC meeting. The agendas committee would review and prioritize GPC, finance and non-regular council agenda items.
Can we make a move to the GPC meeting? That makes sense, because that's a pretty quick turnaround time.
Yeah.
It'd be impossible for us
It's
to.
too hard.
That's 2 weeks from now.
Oh, friendly amendment?
Yeah.
When staff are prepared to make.
Whatever will
I think
work.
the earliest we could target is the end of August.
And not finance and audit either, because we have a separate finance and audit again.
So it will, yeah, it'll come back to the next GPC, the date of which is,
That's what, well, the 29th of July, which is the
sorry, not
deadline.
the next,
Yeah, so I think
September, or August 26th.
August 26th or September 9th, whatever one we can do, based on all the other issues that are going on.
Through the chair, I fully understand there's a lot of logistical things to consider, and this requires discussion. I think fundamentally, I think this is a piece that's missing to allow us to more effectively set our agenda and make sure that the right communication is happening to get items on and discussed in a way that makes sense for staff and council. And I fully understand that a lot of discussions happen, so whenever background research needs to happen for us to have a proper discussion at whatever time, it's fine.
Just as an illustration, tomorrow is the deadline for reports to go to council on the 29th.
So,
And
So they
so I think that just,
Kind of
like,
come over work and
it's
stuff.
just a 2-week, there's a 2-week lag in there to get everything internally through the system. So, yeah, so if that was your wish, then I'd say target either the 26th of August or the September 9th. It's a realistic date to come back with a fully fleshed out, thought through process.
thank you. I'm gonna call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Hearing none. Okay. Could I have a question? Anyone have that question? A motion for adjournment, please. Thank you, Councilor Brown. Second, Councilor Bonner. Thank you.
Vote on it? I'm in favor.
Thanks, anybody in favor?
Because I looked at the audit, but they thought it was.